Chapter 1. A most irregular Wednesday. Chris woke to the sensation of rolling, which struck him as peculiar since his bed had never possessed wheels, and his room had certainly never been aboard a ship. He opened one eye, then the other, and discovered that his bedroom had acquired a troubling new angle approximately 30 degrees, if his studies in geometry at Whitmore College served him correctly. His brass bed frame had slid across the hardwood floor and now rested against the far wall, which meant he was lying at a slant that made his head feel stuffed with cotton batting. Or perhaps that was simply the residue of last night's dinner. Mother had prepared her experimental pickle loaf again, a dish that combined her two great passions, economy and a disturbing faith in the preservative powers of vinegar. "Samantha?" he called out, his voice cracking in a way it hadn't since he was 15. No response came, though he could hear water lapping somewhere below, a sound that had no business occurring inside a house in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, which was a full 60 miles from the nearest significant body of water. Chris extracted himself from his tangled bedsheet switch, had taken on the quality of a poorly made cocoon and placed his feet on the floor. The floor, he noted with growing alarm, was wet, not damp, not moist. Properly wet, as though someone had dumped the contents of the bathtub across the entire second story, though even Mother's most enthusiastic cleaning frenzies had never resulted in such flooding. He stumbled to his bedroom door, fighting gravity's new preferences, and wrenched it open. The hallway had become a kind of slanted canal. Water, murky and greenish, reached halfway up the walls, lapping at the portraits of grim-faced ancestors who now appeared to be sinking into a most undignified bog. "Samantha!" This time he bellowed it. Propriety be damned. A door crashed open down the hall. Samantha's room, and his sister emerged in her nightgown, her dark hair unpinned and wild around her shoulders, clutching what appeared to be a jar of aloe vera cream. She had a peculiar obsession with the stuff, claiming it was the only thing preventing her skin from becoming as coarse as a workman's boot, though Chris suspected she simply enjoyed the ritual of application. "Christopher Marcus Henderson," she said, using his full Christian name as though he were the one who had done something wrong. "Why is our house attempting to become a boat? I haven't the faintest idea. Where are Mother and Father?" Samantha's face cycled through several expressions: confusion, realization, and finally a kind of absurd relief. "The Hartwick's dinner party. They stayed overnight. Oh, thank heavens, they're not drowned in the parlor." Chris felt he should be more concerned about their parents' absence, but instead found himself grateful they wouldn't have to fish Mother's body out from behind the Davenport. The thought was so horrible and yet so ridiculous that a laugh burped up from his chest before he could stop it. "This is not amusing," Samantha said, though her mouth twitched. "We're in a tilted, flooding house with no parents, no help, and no explanation. I'm supposed to have tea with the Pennyweather boy this afternoon. His mother says he has excellent prospects in the turquoise trade." "Turquoise?" Chris repeated. "Good God, Sam, our house is sinking, and you're worried about some mining merchant's son." "I am 17 years old and still unmarried," she said with brittle dignity. "The house can sink after tea." Chris made his way down the hall, which required a kind of sideways shuffle, like a crab with unusually good posture. The water was cold and smelled of earth-knot, the fresh earth of Mother's garden, but the deep, wormy earth from the far back of the property, where things rotted in the shade of the weeping willows. Those trees had always unsettled him with their drooping branches, and the way they seemed to whisper when there was no wind. "Do you think it's a sinkhole?" Samantha asked, following him. "Didn't the Pritchards' barn collapse into one last spring, though I don't recall it filling with water?" "Sinkholes don't make houses float," Chris said, reaching the top of the stairs. He stopped. The stairs descended into dark water that filled the entire first floor, at least what he could see of it. The front door was somewhere under that murk, along with Mother's prized settee, Father's newspaper collection, and the piano that Samantha played with more enthusiasm than skill. Something pale moved beneath the surface. Chris's stomach clenched. "Did you see that?" "See what?" "Something in the water. Something large. They both stared into the gloom. The water rippled, though there was no wind inside the house. Then, slowly, an object broke the surface, a wooden ladder floating vertically like a periscope, barnacled with what appeared to be mud and bits of willow bark. "That's not ours," Samantha whispered. "No," Chris agreed. "It decidedly is not." The ladder bobbed there, as though waiting for them to make a decision about it. Chris had the distinct and unsettling impression that the ladder was, in fact, looking at them, though ladders possessed no eyes, and he was surely losing his mind. "I need my corset," Samantha announced suddenly. "And a proper dress. I'm not facing whatever this is in my nightclothes. Sam, I don't think the water cares about I will not die improperly attired." She shrieked with such force that a turquoise vase on the hallway table toppled over and rolled down toward the water. The vase, a gift from some aunt who'd traveled to the Southwest Territories, splashed into the flood and disappeared. Chris pinched the bridge of his nose. This was not how he'd imagined his Wednesday unfolding. He'd planned to read ahead in his Latin texts, perhaps take a constitutional around the property, and avoid thinking about the essay he owed Professor Wickersham on the philosophical implications of modern plumbing. Instead, he was trapped in a diagonal house filling with mysterious water, watching his sister have hysterics about undergarments while a disembodied ladder observed them both. "Fine," he said. "Get dressed. I'll see if I can determine the nature of our predicament." Samantha nodded and squelched back toward her room, leaving wet footprints that looked disturbingly like hieroglyphics. Chris stood at the top of the stairs, studying the submerged first floor, the impossible ladder, and the way the morning light came through the windows at entirely wrong angles, turning everything turquoise and gold. From somewhere deep in the house, perhaps from the cellar, which would now be entirely underwater, came a sound like laughter. Not human laughter. The laughter of something that found this entire situation absolutely hilarious, as though someone had just told it the world's filthiest joke. Chris thought of pickles, for some reason. Pickles and dirt and the way the weeping willows wept. "Well," he said to no one in particular, "I suppose this is happening." The ladder bobbed in what might have been agreement. Wednesday, it seemed, had officially gotten away from them. Chapter 2. The parlor beneath. 20 minutes later, Samantha emerged from her bedroom looking like she was prepared to attend a funeral her own, presumably. She'd managed to wrestle herself into a dark green walking dress with leg of mutton, sleeves that Chris suspected she'd had to fasten without the usual assistance of their maid, Betty. The result was slightly lopsided, giving her the appearance of a ship's figurehead that had been poorly restored by an enthusiastic but unskilled carpenter. "Don't say a word," she warned, holding up one finger. "I wasn't going to. You were thinking it. Thinking isn't speaking. In this family, it's close enough." She clutched her jar of aloe vera like a talisman. "Now, what's our plan? Do we have a plan? Please tell me you formulated a plan while I was preserving my dignity." Chris had not formulated a plan. He had, instead, spent the 20 minutes staring at the flooded first floor and trying to remember if he'd perhaps hit his head yesterday during rugby practice at Whitmore. He'd been tackled rather spectacularly by a boy named Pemberton, who had the build of a draft horse and the temperament to match. Perhaps this was all some elaborate concussion dream, and he was actually lying in the college infirmary while a concerned physician held smelling salts under his nose. But no, the water was too cold, too real. It had soaked through his socks and made his feet ache. Dreams didn't usually bother with that level of discomfort. "I think," he said slowly, "we need to go down there." Samantha's eyes widened. "Into the water? With that? That ladder creature?" "It's a ladder, Sam. Ladders aren't creatures. That one is behaving suspiciously." She wasn't wrong. The ladder had drifted closer to the stairs and now bobbed near the third step from the top, as though waiting for them. In the murky water, Chris could make out vague shapes, the outline of the grandfather clock, the shadow of the coat rack, something that might have been the brass umbrella stand, or possibly a very dedicated river eel. "We need to find out what's happening," Chris said, trying to sound authoritative in the way his professors did when explaining particularly tedious Latin declensions. "We need to understand the nature of this situation, and we should probably look for supplies, food, dry clothing, perhaps some of Father's tools from the shed if we can reach it." "The shed is outside, Christopher. We're inside a tilted house that may or may not be floating." "Yes, thank you. I had noticed." Samantha peered down at the water with the expression of someone being asked to drink spoiled milk. "What if there are fish? I despise fish. Slimy, dead-eyed little beasts. Do you remember when Father took us fishing at Lake Harriet and that perch got tangled in my hair?" Chris did remember. Samantha had shrieked so loudly that a family of geese had taken flight, and Father had nearly capsized the rowboat. She'd been 12 at the time, and he'd been 14, and he'd laughed so hard he'd gotten hiccups that lasted for 3 hours. The memory surfaced now, bright and sharp. The summer sun, the smell of the lake, Samantha's face twisted in horror as Father tried to extract the fish while it flapped frantically. Their mother calling from the shore that they were disturbing the entire county. It had been a perfect afternoon, right up until the fish incident. They'd had a picnic, beforehand cold chicken and potato salad, and those little cucumber sandwiches Mother made with too much butter. Samantha had worn a yellow dress the color of daffodils, and she'd woven actual daffodils into her hat, though by the end of the day they'd all wilted and hung down around her face like exhausted petals. "I remember," Chris said softly. "You made me promise never to tell Mother about the language you used." "I was possessed by the devil," Samantha said with great dignity. "Reverend Blackwood would have understood. He's always saying how Satan works through unexpected vessels. I don't think he meant perch. Well, he should have been more specific." She sighed, a long, dramatic exhalation that seemed to deflate her by several inches. "Fine. We'll go down. But if something touches my ankle, I'm holding you personally responsible." Chris descended first, the water rising from his ankles to his knees to his thighs as he worked his way down the stairs. It was shockingly cold. The kind of cold that made his bones ache and his teeth want to chatter. The water had a thickness to it, a weight that felt wrong somehow, as though it wasn't quite water but something pretending to be water for the sake of appearances. Behind him, Samantha made a series of small, distressed noises, little gasps and whimpers that she was clearly trying to suppress. "It's disgusting," she hissed. "It's touching me. The water is touching me. That's generally what water does, Sam. Don't be pedantic at a time like this." The ladder had moved again. It now floated directly in front of Chris, vertical and still, its rungs disappearing down into the murky depths. Up close, he could see that it was old, very old. The wood was dark with age and water damage, carved with strange symbols that might have been decorative or might have been some kind of language. Mud clung to several rungs, and twisted around the top was what looked like a strand of willow bark, stripped and dried and wrapped like a deliberate decoration. "Don't touch it," Samantha warned. "I wasn't going to." "You were leaning toward it. That's pre-touching." Chris ignored her and pushed past the ladder, wading into what had been their parlor. The water reached his waist now, and he could feel his pants ballooning around his legs in a deeply undignified manner. Above him, the ceiling tilted at that same 30-degree angle, and the chandelier Mother's Pride, imported from Philadelphia, hung askew, its crystals clinking softly against each other like wind chimes made of ice. The furniture had rearranged itself according to the logic of water and gravity. The settee floated near the far wall, upside down, its carved legs pointing toward the ceiling like the limbs of a dead beetle. The piano had somehow wedged itself into the corner, and sheet music drifted on the surface of the water like lily pads. Chris snatched one oop Chopin, something Samantha had been massacring for the past 3 months. "Look," Samantha said, pointing. The family photographs, hung in careful arrangement on the wall, were now partially submerged, but that wasn't what she was pointing at. In the water beneath the photographs, faces looked up at them. Not reflections, the angle was wrong for reflections. Faces in the water itself, pale and indistinct, mouths open as though they were singing or screaming or calling out words that couldn't quite reach the surface. Chris's heart performed an acrobatic feat in his chest. "Do you see them?" "I see them," Samantha whispered. "Chris, I see them." The faces multiplied. Dozens of them now, maybe hundreds, all looking up through the water like drowned souls pressed against the underside of ice. Some of them looked familiar, not specifically, but in the way dreams make strangers seem like old friends. A woman with long hair that moved in currents, a man with hollow eyes, a child with its mouth stretched too wide, and they were laughing. Not the horrible laugh from the cellar earlier, but softer, more insidious. The laughter of people who knew a secret, who understood something fundamental that Chris and Samantha did not. It bubbled up through the water, broke the surface in small pops and gurgles, filled the parlor with sound that shouldn't exist. "I don't like this," Samantha said, her voice high and tight. "Christopher, I really, truly, deeply don't like this." "Neither do I. I want to leave." "We can't. We're on the second floor of a floating house. Where exactly would we go?" Samantha made a noise that might have been a sob or might have been a laugh of her own, the kind of laugh people make when things have gone so wrong that the only response is hysteria. "Sunday school," she said abruptly. "Do you remember Sunday school?" "What?" Chris tore his gaze away from the faces in the water, which had started moving now, swimming in lazy circles like fish in a bowl. "Mrs. Henderson, different Mrs. Henderson, not Mother, the one with the mole on her chin. She taught us about hell, about the souls trapped in water, the ones who died unshriven, who wandered between worlds." Samantha's hands were shaking, making the jar of aloe vera rattle. She said water was a passage, that it could be a door if you weren't careful, if you didn't say your prayers correctly. Mrs. Henderson was a superstitious old bat who once claimed she saw the devil in a butter churn. That doesn't mean she was wrong about everything. The laughter grew louder. The faces in the water pressed closer to the surface, and now Chris could see that they weren't just looking up at them, they were reaching. Pale hands, waterlogged and swollen, stretched toward the surface, fingers grasping at nothing. One of them broke through, a hand grey white. The skin, pruned and peeling, emerged from the water between Chris and Samantha. Then an arm, then a shoulder, then a head with hair that streamed water and eyes that had no pupils, just blank whiteness like boiled eggs. The thing opened its mouth. Water poured out, and with the water came words in a voice that sounded like drowning. "Welcome home, children. We've been waiting. The picnic is ready. Won't you stay? Won't you play? Won't you sink with us, down, down, down where the daffodils grow in the dark?" Samantha screamed. The thing lunged, and from above them, from the ceiling, from the walls, from everywhere and nowhere came the sound of a trapdoor opening. A great metallic clang that shook the entire house. The thing in the water jerked backward as though yanked by invisible ropes. The faces vanished. The laughter cut off mid-note. For a moment, there was only silence and the soft lapping of water. Then the ceiling began to crack. Not small cracks, massive fissures that split the plaster and exposed the wooden beams beneath. And through those cracks, light poured down. Not natural light, not sunlight or lamplight or any kind of light that Chris had ever seen. This light was wrong turquoise and gold and somehow oily, like light filtered through dirty water or seen through a fever dream. The house groaned. The tilt increased. They were sliding sideways now, the water sloshing violently, furniture tumbling, the chandelier swinging in wider and wider arcs. "Move!" Chris grabbed Samantha's arm and hauled her back toward the stairs. They crashed through the water, fighting against the current that seemed determined to pull them deeper into the parlor, toward whatever was coming through those cracks in the ceiling. Samantha lost her grip on the aloe vera jar. It fell into the water and sank immediately, leaving a trail of green gel, that spread across the surface like algae. They reached the stairs, started climbing. Behind them, the light intensified, and with it came a sound, a deep, resonant humming that Chris felt in his teeth, in his bones, in the soft parts of his brain that still believed in monsters under the bed. Something was coming through the ceiling. Something vast. Something that knew their names. Chris and Samantha reached the second floor and collapsed against the hallway wall, gasping, soaking wet, staring at each other with wild eyes. Below them, the parlor filled with that impossible light, and in the light, a shape began to form too large for the room, too strange for the world, too terrible to look at directly. And then, with perfect comic timing that would have been funny if it weren't so absolutely horrifying, they heard a voice drift up from the flooded parlor. A cheerful voice. A familiar voice. "Children, are you home? We came back early from the Hartwicks. Your mother forgot her good brooch." Father. Their parents were here. The thing in the parlor laughed this time. A sound like breaking glass and ripping metal, and every nightmare Chris had ever had as a child rolled into one terrible gleeful roar. And the front door, somewhere beneath the water, began to open. Chapter 3. The Sassafras Woman. No! Chris didn't know who shouted it, himself or Samantha, or perhaps both of them simultaneously. The word echoed through the tilted hallway, bounced off the wet walls, and seemed to punch a hole through reality itself. Because something changed. The impossible light flickered. The shape in the parlor wavered like a reflection disturbed by a stone thrown into a pond. And Father's voice cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a sound like a gramophone winding down, his words stretching and distorting into nonsense. "Run," Chris said. "Sam, we have to—" But Samantha was already moving. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength and hauled him down the hallway, away from the stairs, away from the parlor, away from whatever their parents had become or were about to encounter. They crashed through the door to the guest bedroom, the one that faced the back of the property, overlooking the weeping willows and the old woods beyond. Samantha didn't hesitate. She ran straight for the window, yanked it open with a screech of swollen wood, and looked out. "Oh," she said. "Oh, that's not normal either." Chris joined her at the window and felt his remaining grip on sanity loosen another notch. The house wasn't floating in water. The house was floating in air. They were suspended perhaps 50 feet above the ground, tilted at that peculiar angle, bobbing gently like a balloon on a string. Below them, the yellow paint of their home's exterior looked garish and wrong against the dim, greenish light that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere. The yard was gone. The garden where Mother grew her vegetables was gone. The property line, the fence, the road all gone. Instead, there were trees. Miles and miles of trees, stretching in every direction, their branches creating a canopy so thick that only fragments of sky peeked through. These weren't the orderly oaks and maples of Pennsylvania. These were ancient things, twisted and huge, their bark black as coal, their leaves silver in the strange light. And between them, moving through the undergrowth, Chris could see shapes. Large shapes. Shapes with antlers. "Are those reindeer?" Samantha whispered. They were, in fact, reindeer. Or something very like reindeer. Dozens of them, moving in a silent herd through the woods below, their antlers catching the light like crown jewels. But they were wrong, too big, their eyes too knowing, their movements too deliberate. They walked like they were following a path only they could see, heading somewhere with absolute certainty. "We need to get down there," Chris said. "Down there? Into the impossible forest with the nightmare deer? As opposed to staying up here with whatever's coming through the ceiling." As if in answer, the house shuddered. From below came a crash, furniture breaking, water surging, and that laugh again, except now it sounded like Father's laugh, which was somehow worse than anything else that had happened. Samantha's face went through several colors before settling on a determined pale green. Fine. How? Chris looked around the guest bedroom wildly. A bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, a small writing desk. Nothing remotely useful for descending 50 feet through the air. Unless, the sheets, he said. We tie the sheets together, make a rope. Have you lost your mind? That only works in penny dreadfuls, and even then it's patently ridiculous. Do you have a better suggestion? Samantha opened her mouth, closed it, then marched to the bed and began yanking off the coverlet with such violence that Chris thought she might tear it in half. If I die doing this, I'm haunting you, she announced. I'll rattle chains in your ears every night for eternity. Noted. They worked quickly, tearing sheets into strips, knotting them together with the kind of knots Chris vaguely remembered from his brief, unsuccessful stint in the boys' brigade. Samantha produced hairpins from seemingly nowhere and used them to secure the knots, muttering about how Sister Agnes at Sunday school had once said that a woman's hair was her glory, but her hairpins were her salvation, and maybe Sister Agnes hadn't been entirely mad after all. The house shuddered again. The door to the hallway buckled inward, water seeping under it in dark tendrils. Now or never, Chris said, tying one end of their makeshift rope to the bedpost and throwing the other end out the window. It unspooled into the air, dangling about 30 feet down. Not quite far enough, but close. You first, Samantha said. Ladies first. Don't you dare pull that chivalry nonsense on me, Christopher Henderson. You're the one who got us into this. I did nothing. I woke up in a tilted house. Exactly. You woke up. You probably caused this with your college boy thoughts. Too much philosophy, not enough common sense. Behind them, the door exploded inward. Water rushed into the room, cold and black and full of reaching hands. The thing from the parlor filled the doorway too large, too many limbs, with father's face and mother's face and faces Chris didn't recognize, all shifting across its surface like oil on water. Children, it said in a voice like drowning. Don't you want to stay for supper? Chris grabbed Samantha and quite literally threw her out the window. Her scream was spectacular operatic in its range and volume. Chris had one moment to feel terrible about his choice before diving out after her, grabbing the sheet rope, and sliding down so fast his hands burned. They hit the ground hard, first Samantha, then Chris on top of her in an ungainly heap that would have been mortifying under any other circumstances. Above them, the house groaned and spun slowly on its invisible axis. The thing in the window reached out with too many arms, but couldn't or wouldn't follow them down. Get off me, Samantha wheezed. You weigh as much as a cart horse. That's hurtful and inaccurate. They disentangled themselves and stood on shaking legs, staring up at their impossible floating home. Then, as if someone had cut a string, the house simply stopped floating. It plummeted. They ran. The house hit the ground behind them with a sound like the world-ending timber splintering, glass shattering, water exploding outward in a wave that sent them both tumbling through the underbrush. Chris's head cracked against something harder root. A rock and stars burst across his vision. When he could see clearly again, Samantha was pulling him to his feet, her hair full of leaves, her dress torn, her face flushed with something that looked suspiciously like exhilaration. Did we just? She started. We did. Are we? I think so. They looked at each other and started laughing. Terrible, inappropriate, hysteria-tinged laughter that felt like the only sane response to complete insanity. They laughed until their sides hurt, until tears ran down their faces, until the absurdity of their situation, floating house, drowned faces, impossible forest, father monster, sheetrope escape became almost manageable simply by being too ridiculous to be real. I can't believe that worked, Samantha gasped between giggles. I can't believe we're alive. I can't believe I lost my aloe vera. That set them off again, and they might have stood there laughing forever, if not for the voice that cut through the trees. Well, well, what have we here? Visitors. The laughter died in Chris's throat. She emerged from between the massive trees like she'd been part of the forest itself, a woman, tall and angular, dressed in layers of fabric that might have been clothing or might have been moss and bark and cobwebs all stitched together. Her hair was the color of coal dust, piled high on her head and stuck through with twigs and what looked like small bones. Her face was handsome rather than pretty, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that glittered like chips of mica. Around her neck hung dozens of small bottles and vials, all filled with different-colored liquids and substances. Chris could make out labels on some of them, though the handwriting was spidery and strange. Sassafras root, willow bark, bone meal, tears, crocodile, tears, widow, dreams, stolen. "I'm Mordeline," the woman said, her voice like wind through dead leaves. "Though some call me Mother Maud, and some call me the Sassafras Woman, and some call me considerably worse things which I shan't repeat in front of young people. You're the Henderson children, aren't you? Christopher and Samantha, I've been expecting you." Chris found his voice, though it came out higher than he would have liked. "How do you know our names?" "Oh, I know everything that happens in my woods. Every bird that falls, every deer that passes, every house that drops from the sky like an overripe apple." She smiled, revealing teeth that were just slightly too pointed. "You've caused quite a commotion. The hunt is very displeased." "The hunt?" Samantha repeated. "Yes, child, the hunt. They come through here every night, chasing things that shouldn't be caught, catching things that shouldn't exist. Very organized, very particular, and they do not appreciate interruptions to their schedule." Mordeline tilted her head, studying them like specimens in a jar. "You're in their woods now, their territory, and you've brought something with you, something from the in-between, something that was sleeping and is now most decidedly awake." Behind them, in the wreckage of their house, something groaned. Not the groan of settling wood, but something organic and angry. "We didn't bring anything," Chris said. "We just woke up, and the house was flooding, and you thought it was real," Mordeline finished. "How delightful, how perfectly, wonderfully foolish." She began walking, her skirts rustling. "Come along then. Can't leave you here for the hunt to find. They'd string you up in the trees and use you for target practice. Very sporting, but rather permanent." "Wait," Samantha said. "Who are you? What is this place? What's happening to us?" Mordeline stopped and turned, her expression softening just slightly though on her face. Softness still looked rather predatory. "This place, child, is where lost things go. Dreams that can't wake up, thoughts that got too loud, memories that won't stay buried. As for what's happening to you..." She reached into her collection of bottles and pulled out one filled with a root that glowed faintly golden. "Sassafras. That's a story that'll take some telling and some brewing. Come to my cottage. I'll make tea. We'll talk. And perhaps I'll help you find your way back to the waking world, if you're very polite and very lucky." She began walking again, deeper into the woods where the reindeer had gone. Chris and Samantha exchanged a glance. "Do we trust her?" Samantha whispered. "Do we have a choice?" Behind them, their house gave one final, shuddering collapse, and from the ruins rose a shape black and fluid and reaching. The thing that had worn their parents' faces. "Children," it called, "don't go with the old witch. Stay with Mother, stay with Father, stay in the house, stay forever." Mordeline looked back over her shoulder, her eyes flashing. "Oh, hush, you tedious thing. They're mine now. Find your own dreamers to torment." She raised one hand, the one clutching the sassafras root, and spoke a word that Chris didn't hear so much as feel, a word that made his bones vibrate and his teeth ache. The shape in the house ruins shrieked and collapsed inward, sucked back down into whatever darkness had spawned it. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, Mordeline laughed, a surprisingly warm sound, rich and genuine. "That felt wonderful. I haven't banished something in weeks. I was getting rusty." She gestured to them again. Come along, come along. The reindeer are gathering for their evening congregation, and it's quite spectacular if you've never seen it. Very spiritual, terrible for the local vegetation, but you can't have everything. And because there was truly nothing else to do, because their house was destroyed, and their parents were either dead or transformed, or somewhere safe at the Hartwicks, while their children lost their minds. Because the forest stretched endlessly in all directions and Mordeline seemed to be the only thing in it that wasn't actively trying to kill them, Chris and Samantha followed the sassafras woman into the woods. The last thing Chris saw before the trees swallowed them was the wreckage of the yellow house, lying broken and tilted in the moss, looking for all the world like a child's toy that had been played with too roughly and then abandoned. Somewhere in those ruins, in the flooded parlor or the collapsed cellar or the shattered bedrooms, something with too many faces whispered their names. But they were already gone, walking between trees as old as forgetting, following a witch who smelled of herbs and earth, and something indefinably wild, toward whatever came next in this place where houses fell from the sky and dreams refused to end. The reindeer watched them pass, their eyes gleaming like coins in the darkness. And deep in the forest, in a clearing Chris and Samantha hadn't yet seen, something ancient stirred in its sleep and smiled, because the real game was only just beginning. Chapter 4. The splitting Mordeline's cottage appeared between one step and the next knot, gradually coming into view as they walked, but suddenly existing where it hadn't existed a moment before, as though the forest had simply decided to reveal it. It was less a cottage and more a collection of organic matter that had agreed to function as a dwelling. Walls of woven branches, a roof of living moss, windows that might have been gaps in the structure or might have been actual glass, it was impossible to tell. "Home sweet home," Mordeline announced, producing a key from somewhere in her layers of clothing. The key was made of what looked like a deer's leg bone. "Mind the threshold, it's particular about who crosses it." Chris was about to ask what that meant when the threshold proved itself by reaching up the wood of the doorframe, literally extending like fingers and patting him down as though checking for concealed weapons. Satisfied, it retracted and allowed him to pass. "It's never done that before," Mordeline said, frowning. "How peculiar. You must be carrying something it doesn't recognize." "I'm not carrying anything," Chris protested. "We left everything in the house." "Not everything," Mordeline murmured, studying him with those glittering eyes. "Not the important things, those you carry inside. But we'll come to that. Sit, both of you." The interior of the cottage was exactly as chaotic as Chris had expected, and somehow worse. Every surface was covered with bottles, jars, dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. Animal skulls arranged in what might have been decorative patterns or might have been occult symbols, books stacked in towers that defied physics, and in one corner a spinning wheel that was currently spinning itself, producing thread from nothing. Samantha sat gingerly on a stool that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of wood, possibly while the tree was still alive and complaining about it. Chris took the chair opposite, which creaked ominously under his weight. Mordeline busied herself at a stove that burned with green flames, preparing tea in a kettle that whistled in what sounded like actual words, though Chris couldn't make them out. "Now then," she said, not turning around. "You want to know what's happening. You want to know why your house flooded and flew and fell. You want to know about the faces in the water and the thing with your parents' voices and why you're in a forest that shouldn't exist." "Yes," Samantha said. "All of that. Please." "Well, I can't tell you." Chris felt his stomach drop. "What?" "I can't tell you because you wouldn't believe me. Or rather, you'd believe me with your minds but not with your hearts. And that's worse than not believing at all. No, you need to see it. You need to experience it." She turned, holding 2 steaming cups that smelled of sassafras and something darker, earthier. "Drink this." Chris stared at the cup she thrust toward him. "Is it poisoned? Don't be ridiculous. If I wanted you dead, I'd have let the hunt find you. This is much more interesting." She pressed the cup into his hands. "It's dream tea. It'll show you the truth. Or a truth. Truth is rather flexible in places like this." "Places like what?" Samantha asked, accepting her own cup with visible reluctance. Places where you're asleep, child. Deep asleep. Both of you, back in your beds in that yellow house. Dreaming so hard you've fallen right through the floor of sleep into the basement of consciousness, where everything that gets repressed lives and breeds and occasionally throws parties. Chris's hands had gone numb. We're dreaming? Oh, not just dreaming. Trapped. Stuck. Snagged on something in the deep places. Could be trauma, could be magic, could be you ate something that disagreed with you. The mind does peculiar things when the body's in distress. But yes, fundamentally, you're both unconscious in the waking world, and your minds are here, wandering around like tourists who've gotten spectacularly lost. Samantha made a small noise that might have been a laugh or a sob. That's impossible. Is it? Is it really? Mordeline gestured around her cottage. More impossible than floating houses. More impossible than me? Drink the tea. It won't hurt. Well, it might hurt a bit. But it won't kill you, which is really the important distinction. Chris looked at Samantha. She looked back. In her eyes he saw fear and exhaustion and something else, a kind of desperate hope that maybe, if this was all a dream, they could simply wake up. Together? He said. Together. She agreed. They drank. The tea tasted like sassafras and dirt, and the smell of their mother's garden after rain, and something indefinably ancient. Like drinking memory itself. It burned going down, then turned cold, then seemed to evaporate inside him, spreading outward from his stomach in waves that made his vision blur and his ears ring. Oh, he said. Oh no. Oh yes, Mordeline said from very far away. Hold on, children. This part is unpleasant. Chris was falling upward. That was the only way to describe it. He was standing in Mordeline's cottage and simultaneously rising through the ceiling, through the moss roof, through the canopy of the ancient trees, up and up into a sky that shouldn't exist, up past clouds that looked like faces, up past a sun that was too large and too dark, up into a space between spaces where reality was more of a suggestion than a rule. And then he stopped falling, rising, and he was simply there, floating. Looking down at himself, he could see his body still sitting in Mordeline's cottage, the teacup slack in his hand, his face gone pale and slack. Samantha sat across from him, equally vacant, both of them looking like poorly made wax figures of themselves. Mordeline was muttering something, drawing symbols in the air with a finger, and where she drew, light lingered. This is me, Chris thought, looking at his floating self, except it wasn't quite him. This version was translucent, gossamer thin, more idea than substance. I'm outside myself. I'm watching myself dream. Correct, said a voice that came from inside his head and outside it simultaneously. Chris Spooner tried to spin. But spinning required a body with an inner ear, and he wasn't entirely sure he had one anymore. Instead, he simply perceived a different direction, and in that direction stood a figure. It was him, but not him. It was Chris as he might have been if he'd never been born, or if he'd been born and died immediately, or if he'd been born into a different family, in a different time, in a different body. It was every version of himself that had never happened, all standing in the same impossible space, overlapping like images on poorly stacked photographs. What are you? Chris whispered, or thought he whispered, or intended to whisper. I'm you, the figure said, the part that stays behind when you dream, the part that watches, the part that remembers what you are when you're not busy pretending to be a person. I don't understand. You do, though. You've always known, somewhere deep down, that the waking world is just as much a dream as this one, that you're no more real there than you are here. That Christopher Marcus Henderson, 19 years old, student at Whitmore College, son of Leonard and Margaret, brother to Samantha, that's just a story you're telling yourself. And right now, the story is stuck. The knot. Chris reached out with a hand that was and wasn't there, and touched Chris's chest where his heart would be if he had a chest. The touch sent electricity through him, and suddenly he could see everything. He saw himself as a baby, screaming in his mother's arms, saw himself at 7, climbing the oak tree in the backyard and falling, breaking his arm. Saw himself at 12, discovering a dead bird and trying to perform a funeral that no one else attended. Saw himself at 15, kissing Martha Pritchard behind the schoolhouse and being so terrified he'd nearly vomited. Saw himself at Whitmore, struggling with Latin, making friends, losing friends, feeling desperately alone in rooms full of people. And he saw himself earlier that morning, really earlier, in the waking world eating breakfast, eggs and toast. His father reading the newspaper. His mother fussing about the pickle loaf she'd made. Samantha complaining about the Pennyweather boy. Normal, boring, real. And then something in the food. Something that tasted like almonds and made his tongue go numb. Something that made his vision blur. Something that made him stand up from the table and try to speak. But his words came out wrong, came out twisted, came out... Poison, Chris breathed. We were poisoned. Yes, not Chris said. Low grade. Slow acting. You're not dead, but you're not quite alive either. You're in between. And in between is where dreams have teeth. Who? Chris felt rage building in his translucent chest. Who would poison us? Does it matter? What matters is that you're trapped here until your body wakes up or dies. And while you're here, you're vulnerable to everything that lives in the space between sleeping and waking. All the things that feed on dreams. All the things that are made of dreams. And some of them are very, very hungry. The knot Chris began to fade, its many selves peeling apart like layers of onion skin. Find the source, it said as it dissolved. Find what's keeping you here. Find the poison's origin. And for God's sake, Christopher, wake up before something worse finds you. Wait, Chris shouted. How do I? But he was alone in the space between spaces, floating above his own body, watching himself dream. And the only sound was the whistling of wind through places that had no air, and the only company was the terrible understanding that he was dying, slowly, in a yellow house in Pennsylvania, while his mind wandered lost in a forest that existed nowhere and everywhere. He tried to scream. He tried to wake up. He tried to force himself back into his body through sheer will. But the distance was too far, and the dream was too deep, and all he could do was float there, bodiless and terrified, watching his chest barely rise and fall in Maudeline's cottage far below. Samantha was running. Not with her body was somewhere else, somewhere safe. Sitting in a cottage drinking tea, but her mind was running, sprinting, racing forward through time itself like a stone skipping across the surface of a river. She saw the cottage flash past, saw the forest age and die and regrow, saw the trees fall and new trees rise, saw the seasons cycle so fast they blurred into a grey nothingness, punctuated by brief flashes of green and white and gold. Forward, forward, always forward, time pulling her like a current. And then she stopped. She stood, or her consciousness stood. Whatever remained of her that could still push Ivana Street in a city she didn't recognize. The buildings were impossibly tall, reaching toward a sky choked with smoke or smog or something worse. The street was paved with a black material that gleamed wetly, and strange vehicles moved along it, horseless carriages, but sleeker, faster, their bodies made of metal and glass, emitting sounds like mechanical wasps. People walked past her, or through her, because she realized with a lurch that she wasn't really there. She was a ghost, a projection, a consciousness flung forward into a time that hadn't happened yet. The people wore clothing she'd never seen: women in trousers, scandalously short dresses, their hair cut in ways that would have given her mother an apoplexy. Men in casual shirts without collars, some with fabric wrapped around their heads, bandanas, she thought they were called, though she'd only read about them in dime novels about cowboys and bandits. A woman walked directly through Samantha, and for a moment their minds touched. Samantha gasped at the flood of information. This was the year 2024. This city was called Los Angeles. The woman was named Jennifer, and she was worried about something called student loans and whether her car would pass emissions testing, and if her boyfriend was cheating on her with someone named Brittany, and she had a pain in her shoulder that she was ignoring because she couldn't afford to miss work. The contact broke, and Samantha staggered backward, or felt like she staggered, or would have staggered if she had legs. "This is the future," she whispered. "God in heaven, this is the future." "One possible future," said a voice beside her. Samantha turned and found herself facing herself, but older. This Samantha was perhaps 60 years old, her hair grey and pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a dark dress that looked like it came from a time somewhere between 1900 and this bizarre future she'd landed in. This older Samantha's face was lined with age and what looked like profound sadness. "Who are you?" Samantha asked. "I'm the you that never happened," the older Samantha said. "The you that would have existed if you'd lived your full life, married the Pennyweather boy god. What a tedious man he turned out to be, had 4 children, lost 2 of them to influenza, and died of loneliness at 63 in a house that was too big and too empty." She smiled, but it was a terrible smile. "I'm the ghost of a future you'll never have if you don't wake up. We were poisoned," Samantha said, understanding flooding through her like ice water. "Someone poisoned us." "Yes. And while you sleep, time is passing in the waking world. Your bodies are failing. Your parents are frantic, the real ones, not the monsters from your dream. Doctors have been called, prayers have been said, and still you sleep, deeper and deeper, trapped in this place between thoughts." The older Samantha reached out and touched the younger one's face, or where her face would be if she had a face. The touch was cold and infinitely sad. "You have to find your way back, both of you. Chris is seeing one truth, and you're seeing another, but both truths are the same. You're dying, slowly, painfully. Your bodies are shutting down while your minds run wild through every possibility, every dream, every nightmare. How do I wake up?" Samantha felt panic clawing at her chest, though she had no chest, had no body, was just a thought floating in a future that terrified and enthralled her. "You have to want to," the older Samantha said. "You have to want it more than you want to see what comes next, more than you want to escape the boredom of your life, more than you want to avoid marrying someone you don't love and becoming someone you despise. You have to choose the pain of living over the sweetness of dreaming." Around them, the future city hummed with incomprehensible life. The horseless carriages honked and roared. People shouted into small devices they held to their ears. Lights flashed in colors Samantha didn't have names for. Music poured from buildings, not proper music, but wild, throbbing rhythms that made her incorporeal form want to dance and weep simultaneously. "It's beautiful," Samantha heard herself say. "It's terrible and beautiful, and I want to see more. I want to see everything. What happens next? What happens to women? Do we get to vote? Do we get to own property? Do we get to be something other than wives and mothers?" "Yes," the older Samantha said. "To all of it. But not if you die at 17 in a yellow house from poison in your eggs. That future disappears like smoke. That future never happens." "Who poisoned us?" Samantha demanded. "Tell me." But the older Samantha was already fading, dissolving into the strange light of this impossible time. "Find the source," she said, her voice echoing. "Find what's keeping you trapped. And Samantha, for God's sake, choose life, even if it's hard, even if it's boring, even if it's not what you imagined. Choose it." And then Samantha was being pulled backward, yanked through time like a fish on a line, centuries blurring past her in reverse. The city shrinking and changing and disappearing, replaced by smaller cities, then towns, then wilderness, then the forest, then they both gasped simultaneously. Their consciousnesses slamming back into their bodies with such force that they fell off their respective seats, crashing to the floor of Maudeline's cottage. Chris's skin was on fire. Everything was chafing his collar, his sleeves, his pants, as though his body had become hypersensitive to every sensation. He clawed at his shirt, gasping for air, feeling like he was suffocating in his own skin. Samantha was crying, huge racking sobs that shook her entire frame. "I saw it," she wept. "I saw so far forward, and it was beautiful and terrible, and we're dying, Chris, we're dying right now in our beds, and this is all a dream," Chris finished, his voice raw. "We're poisoned. Someone poisoned us. Our bodies are in the waking world, dying, and our minds are here, trapped." Mordeline stood over them, her expression unreadable. "Now you understand," she said softly. "Now you see what you're fighting against. The poison is in your blood, shutting down your organs one by one. And while your bodies fail, your minds have fallen into the deep dreaming, where everything is real and nothing is real, where time doesn't work correctly and space is just a suggestion." "Who?" Samantha demanded through her tears. "Who would do this to us?" "That," Magdalene said, "is the question you need to answer. Because until you know who poisoned you and why, you can't break the dream. You can't wake up. You're stuck here, children, in this place between sleep and death, and the only way out is to solve the mystery that brought you here." She helped them both to their feet, surprisingly gentle. "But at least now you understand the stakes. And at least now you understand the stakes." She gestured around her cottage, out toward the impossible forest. "Is all your mind's creation, a story you're telling yourselves to make sense of what's happening to your dying boggies. Every symbol, every creature, every strange thing you encounter, it all means something. It's all a clue." Chris and Samantha looked at each other. In his sister's eyes, Chris saw his own terror reflected back at him, but also something else. Determination. Fury. The stubborn Henderson pride that ran through both their veins like iron. "Then we solve it," Chris said. "We figure out who poisoned us, we break the dream, and we wake up. Before our bodies die," Samantha added, wiping her eyes roughly. "Before we're trapped here forever." Mordeline smiled, a real smile this time, warm and almost motherly. "There's hope for you yet, children. Now, rest a moment. Catch your breath. What you just experienced would break most minds. The fact that you're both still coherent is remarkable." But Chris couldn't rest. His mind was racing, putting pieces together. The breakfast, the strange taste in the eggs, his father's newspaper, his mother's pickle loaf, Samantha's complaints about the Pennyweather boy. The Pennyweather boy. "Sam," he said slowly, "the Pennyweathers. Didn't Mother say they were coming to dinner? The night before we woke up in the flooded house?" Samantha's face went pale. "Yes, they did come. I remember now, really remember. From the waking world. They came for dinner and stayed late, and Mr. Pennyweather and Father went into the study to discuss business, and Mrs. Pennyweather helped Mother in the kitchen. And the Pennyweather boy," Chris continued, his heart racing. "He was talking to you in the parlor. What did he want?" Samantha's hands had started to shake. "He asked me to marry him, and I said no. I said I wouldn't marry him if he were the last man in Pennsylvania. And he smiled. Chris, he smiled this horrible smile and said," she swallowed hard. "He said, 'We'll see about that.'" In the silence that followed, they could hear the cottage settling around them, the forest breathing outside, and somewhere very far away or very close, depending on how you measured distance in Drimes, the sound of hunting horns blowing in the dark. The game had changed. They knew the rules now. They knew they were dying. And they knew, with cold certainty, that the Pennyweathers had something to do with it. The question was, could they solve the mystery before their bodies gave up entirely? Could they navigate this dream forest, decode its symbols, find the truth hidden in its impossible geography? And more importantly, could they wake up before something worse than poison found them in the deep places where dreams become nightmares, and nightmares become eternal? Outside, the reindeer called to each other in voices that sounded almost human. and in a yellow house in Pennsylvania, 2 bodies lay in their beds, breathing slower and slower, while their parents prayed and doctors frowned, and the Pennyweather family looked on with expressions that might have been concern but looked, if you paid attention, suspiciously like satisfaction.
Chapter 5. The Maid's Confession and the Gored Prophet. We need to go back, Chris said, pacing the small confines of Maudyline's cottage. His legs felt strange, too heavy and too light simultaneously, as though his body couldn't quite remember how weight was supposed to work. Back to the house. There must be clues there, something we missed. The house is destroyed, Samantha pointed out. She'd stopped crying, but her face remained blotchy, and she kept wringing her hands in a way that made Chris want to hold them still. It fell out of the sky and shattered into kindling. "Ah," Maudyline said from where she stood grinding something in a mortar, something that smelled of earth and rot, and underneath it all, surprisingly, cinnamon. But did it? Really? In dreams, nothing is ever truly destroyed. It simply changes form, becomes something else. The house is still there, children, just not where or how you left it. Chris stopped pacing. "Can you take us back to it?" "I could, but I won't." Maudyline looked up, her microchip eyes glittering. "You need to understand how this place works before you go wandering off into the deep forest. Dreams have rules, even if they're not the same rules as the waking world. Break them, and you'll find yourself somewhere much worse than a flooded parlor." "Then teach us," Samantha said, her voice gaining strength. "Quickly. Every moment we spend here is a moment our bodies are dying back there." Maudyline smiled approvingly. "Good. You're thinking clearly. That's half the battle. Most people who fall this deep into the dreaming lose themselves entirely, forget they were ever awake, become permanent residents of their own nightmares." She set down her mortar and gestured for them to come closer. "First rule, everything here is symbolic. The house flooding with water, your lungs filling with fluid as the poison shuts down your respiratory system. The faces in the water, memories trying to surface, trying to warn you. The thing with your parents' faces, your fear that this is somehow their fault, that they should have protected you." Chris felt something click into place in his mind. "The ladder, the one that appeared in the water, what did that symbolize?" "A way out. Your subconscious showing you there's an escape route, even if you don't know how to use it yet." Maudyline pulled out a small bottle from her collection, this one filled with what looked like dried gourd seeds. "Second rule, the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. The forest we're in now, this is relatively shallow dreaming. Uncomfortable, bizarre, but navigable. Go deeper, and you'll find places where logic doesn't just bend. It breaks entirely. Time runs backwards. Space folds in on itself. You could walk for hours and end up back where you started, or take one step and find yourself at the end of the world." "How do we avoid that?" Chris asked. "You don't, you can't, but you can learn to recognize when it's happening and adapt accordingly." She poured the gourd seeds onto the table between them. They arranged themselves into a pattern, a map. Chris realized, though not of any geography he recognized. Third rule, you're not alone here. Everything you see, every creature, every person there, all parts of your dream, yes, but they're also independent entities in their own right. Thoughts given form, fears made flesh, and some of them are much, much older than your little nightmare." "Like you?" Samantha asked. Maudyline's smile turned sharp. "Oh, I'm something else entirely, child. I'm what happens when a dream gets old enough and strong enough that it doesn't need a dreamer anymore. I'm a story that's been told so many times in so many nightmares that I've become permanent. The witch in the woods, the crone with the answers, the dangerous helper who might save you or doom you depending on her mood." She swept the gourd seeds back into their bottle. "But yes, there are others like me, and some of them are far less pleasant." A knock sounded at the door, 3 sharp raps that made Chris jump. Maudyline didn't seem surprised. "Ha! Right on schedule. "Come in, Felix, I've been expecting you." The door opened, and in stepped a manor something approximating a man. He was tall and painfully thin, dressed in a suit that looked like it had been fashionable perhaps 50 years ago. With a waistcoat and a watch chain and a hat he removed as he entered, revealing hair so blonde it was nearly white. His face was handsome in an unsettling way, like a portrait that had been painted by someone who'd never actually seen a human being, but had them described in great detail. "Magdalene," he said, his voice oddly flat, as though he were reading from a script. "Children. How fortuitous. I was hoping to make your acquaintance. Felix works for the same organization that I do, shall we say," Magdalene explained. "We're both shepherds of sorts, guiding lost dreamers, keeping the deeper nightmares at bay. Felix specializes in memories, don't you, Felix?" "I do indeed." Felix turned his attention to Chris and Samantha, and Chris had the uncomfortable sensation of being examined like a specimen under glass. "You're looking for answers about your poisoning, about who and why. I can help with that. I can show you memories you've forgotten, details your conscious mind overlooked. But it will cost you." "Cost us what?" Samantha asked warily. "A memory in exchange for a memory. You show me something you treasure, happy moment, a precious recollection, and I'll show you what you need to know. Fair trade." Chris and Samantha exchanged glances. "What happens to the memory we give you?" Chris asked. "I keep it," Felix said simply. "Add it to my collection. You'll still remember that it happened, but you won't be able to recall the feeling of it. The joy will be gone, leaving only facts. It's not pleasant, but it's not permanent either. When you wake up, if you wake up, the feeling will return. And if we don't wake up..." Samantha pressed. Felix's smile didn't reach his eyes, which Chris now noticed were completely black, no whites at all. "Then I'll have a lovely new memory to cherish, and you'll have the information you need to navigate what comes next. Everyone wins." Magdalene was watching them carefully. "You don't have to do this," she said. "There are other ways to find answers. Slower ways, perhaps more dangerous ways, but other ways nonetheless." Chris thought about his body lying in a bed in Pennsylvania, organs shutting down one by one. About his parents' faces, their real faces, twisted with fear and grief. About doctors shaking their heads and saying there was nothing more to be done. "We don't have time for slow," he said. "I'll do it." "Chris," Samantha started. "One memory, one answer. It's worth it." Felix produced what looked like a small hand mirror from his coat pocket. "Look into this and think of a happy memory, the happiest you can recall. The mirror will do the rest." Chris took the mirror with hands that trembled slightly. He stared into its surface, which didn't reflect his face, but instead showed swirling colors, like oil on water. He thought back, sifting through 17 years of life, looking for something pure and untainted. The memory surfaced. He was 8 years old, and father had taken him to the industrial exhibition in Philadelphia. It had been just the two of them. Samantha was too young. Mother had stayed home and they'd spent the entire day wandering through pavilions filled with marvels. Chris remembered being overwhelmed by the sight of electric lights, hundreds of them, strung up overhead and glowing without flame, without smoke. Just pure clean light powered by invisible forces he didn't understand. Father had explained about dynamos and generators and the glorious future they were living in, this turn of the century. This moment when humanity was leaving behind the darkness of the past and stepping into a bright electric future. They'd eaten roasted chestnuts and drunk cider, and father had bought him a small souvenir, a miniature brass lamp that actually worked, powered by a tiny battery. Chris had treasured it for years, kept it by his bedside, a symbol of that perfect day when he and father had stood together on the edge of tomorrow. The memory flowed out of him into the mirror, and Chris felt something essential drain away with it. He still remembered the day, could still recite the facts of it, but the warmth was gone. The joy had leaked out, leaving only a hollow space where happiness had been. "Excellent," Felix said, pocketing the mirror. "A beautiful memory. The electricity, the hope, the bond between father and son. I shall treasure it. He didn't sound cruel, just matter of fact, which somehow made it worse. Now your answer, he gestured, and the air in front of them rippled like water. An image formed, not quite solid, more like a projection, a window into the past. They saw their kitchen, the morning of the poisoning, mother bustling about, preparing breakfast, father at the table with his newspaper, and there Betty, Samantha breathed. Their maid, Betty Wickham, young and plain-faced, with her hair pulled back severely and her uniform crisp and clean. She was setting the table, laying out plates, and as she moved, they saw her do something so quick it was almost imperceptible. She pulled a small vial from her apron pocket and poured something into the eggs. Just a few drops. Just enough. No, Chris said. That doesn't make sense. Betty's been with our family for 3 years. She has no reason to. The image shifted, pulled back in time. They saw Betty in a different kitchen, younger by several years, working for a different family. The Pennyweathers. They saw young Thomas Pennyweather, the boy who'd proposed to Samantha, talking to Betty in hushed tones. Saw him press money into her hand. Saw him lean close and whisper something that made Betty's face go pale. The image shifted again. Forward in time now. They saw Betty leaving the Pennyweathers' employment, saw her arriving at the Henderson household, recommended by Mrs. Pennyweather herself as a trustworthy girl from a good family, saw her settling in, becoming part of their daily life, waiting. And then, the night before the poisoning, they saw Thomas Pennyweather arrive with his parents for dinner, saw him slip away from the parlour, saw him find Betty in the kitchen, saw him hand her the vial and speak words the vision couldn't capture, but whose meaning was clear. Do it now. Tomorrow morning. Both of them. But why? Samantha's voice cracked. Why would Thomas want to kill us? I rejected his proposal, yes, but that's hardly money, Felix said simply. Your father recently changed his will. Did you know that? Chris shook his head numbly. He did. Made Thomas Pennyweather's father the executor of his estate in the event of his death and the death of his children. The Pennyweathers have been in debt for years, bad investments in the turquoise trade. Of all things, Anne, they need your family's money desperately. Kill the children, wait a respectable amount of time, arrange an accident for your parents, and the estate falls to them as executors. All very neat, all very legal. The image faded, leaving them in Maudeline's cottage once more, the truth hanging in the air like smoke. Betty was being blackmailed, Samantha said quietly. I saw her face. She didn't want to do it. Thomas must have had something on her, something he threatened to reveal if she didn't comply. Probably, Felix agreed. But the why doesn't change the what. She poisoned you. And now you're here dying slowly, while the Pennyweathers wait for news of your deaths. Chris felt rage building in his chest, hot and tight. But underneath the rage was something colder, understanding. This dream, he said slowly. The flooded house, the faces in the water, the thing with our parents' faces, it's all about betrayal. About people we trusted hurting us. Betty, who we saw every day. The Pennyweathers, who were family friends. Our own home turning against us. Very good, Maudeline said approvingly. You're learning to read the symbols. Now you understand what you're really fighting, not just poison, but the emotional weight of that betrayal. Your mind is processing trauma, trying to make sense of how this could happen. And until you accept it and move past it, you can't wake up. So what do we do? Samantha demanded. How do we work through being murdered by people we trusted? You journey deeper, Felix said, into the heart of your dream where the real answers lie, where your subconscious has hidden the key to waking up. It won't be pleasant. The deeper you go, the more you'll confront. Every fear, every doubt, every dark thought you've ever had. But at the center of it all, you'll find the truth you need. The truth that will set you free. Maudeline stood and walked to a corner of her cottage, where something sat covered by a cloth. She pulled the cloth away, revealing an old grand piano completely out of place in the rustic cottage, its polished wood gleaming despite the dim light. "Before you go," she said, "you should know something about this place. The deep forest operates on dream logic. Yes, but it also responds to emotion, to will, to belief. If you believe something strongly enough, it becomes true here. If you fear something intensely enough, it manifests. And if you love something really, truly love it, it can protect you." She ran her fingers over the piano keys, producing a gentle cascade of notes. "This piano belonged to my daughter. In the waking world, she died of consumption when she was 14. But here, in dreams, she still plays. I hear her sometimes late at night, practicing scales. Memory made manifest, love made real." Chris felt something shift in his understanding. So our parents the real ones, not the monster versions. If we hold on to our memory of them, our love for them, they can help us even here. Perhaps, if you need them badly enough, if you believe in them strongly enough. Mordeline covered the piano again, and for a moment she looked terribly sad. "But be careful what you believe in here, children. Belief is power, and power attracts attention." A sound echoed through the forest outside, distant but growing closer. A voice, or something like a voice, calling out words in a rhythm that suggested a sermon or a chant. "Ah," Felix said, tilting his head. "The prophet is making his rounds. How timely." "The prophet?" Chris asked. "You'll see," Mordeline said, moving to the window. "And you should see before you begin your journey. Consider it a warning about what lives in these woods, what's been drawn to your dream." The voice grew louder, and with it came the sound of something heavy moving through the underbrush. Chris and Samantha joined Mordeline at the window and looked out into the darkening forest. At first, Chris thought it was a man walking between the trees. Then he thought it was a dear one of the strange reindeer they'd seen before. Then he realized it was neither and both, and something entirely other. The creature stood perhaps 9 feet tall, walking on 2 legs that bent backward at the knee like a bird's. Its body was vaguely humanoid, but covered in fur or feathers or something that shifted between the two. Its hands were too large, with too many fingers, each ending in a blunt claw. But it was the head that made Chris's stomach lurch. The creature had the skull of a deer, a massive rack of antlers, empty eye sockets, jaw hanging open, but the skull was hollow, and inside it glowed whiz what looked like a rotting gourd, carved with a leering face like a jack-o'-lantern. The gourd face's mouth moved as the creature spoke, and its words echoed through the forest. "Brothers and sisters in darkness, have you heard the good news? The flesh is weak, but the dream is eternal. Confess your sins to the hollow places. Repent in the waters that drown. For the hunt comes for all who wander, and only those who sleep forever shall know peace." "What in God's name is that?" Samantha whispered. "The gourd prophet," Mordeline said quietly. "A fragment of a dream that got lost down here centuries ago. Some poor soul's religious terror given form and left to wander. It preaches to the trees, to the lost dreams, to anything that will listen. It won't hurt you, it can't. Not directly, but it also won't help you. It's simply here, eternal, preaching its nonsense to the void." The creature passed by the cottage, its backward-bending legs carrying it with an unsettling grace. As it moved, Chris saw that it was dragging something, a collection of small objects tied together with what looked like hair or thin rope. Bottles, dried flowers, and he realized with a lurch of horror what appeared to be a small bottle of smelling salts, the kind Mother kept in her dresser for when she felt faint. "It collects things," Felix explained. "Objects from other dreams, other nightmares, totems of the lives people lived before they fell into the deep places. It decorates itself with them like some grotesque parody of religious vestments." The gourd prophet's voice faded as it moved deeper into the forest, but its words lingered. "The hunt comes for all who wander." "What hunt?" Chris asked. "Mordeline mentioned it before." "What is it?" Mordeline and Felix exchanged a look. "That," Mordeline said carefully, "is something you'll encounter soon enough. For now, know this. The hunt is what happens when a dream becomes a nightmare. when the mind decides it's done trying to work through trauma and just wants to destroy the dreamer instead. It takes the form of riders, or wolves, or sometimes just a feeling of being pursued by something vast and inexorable. And once it starts hunting you, it doesn't stop until you wake up or die. Cheerful Samantha muttered. But you can outrun it, Felix added. If you keep moving, if you keep solving the puzzles your subconscious puts in front of you, if you refuse to give in to despair, the hunt can only catch those who stop trying to wake up. Chris looked at Samantha. In the dim light of the cottage, she looked very young and very frightened, but there was steel in her eyes. The steel of someone who'd seen the future, who knew what was possible, who refused to die in a yellow house without experiencing any of it. So we journey deeper, Chris said, into the heart of our dream. Face whatever we have to face. Find the key to waking up. Yes, Maudeline said. She moved to a cabinet and pulled out 2 objects. A small compass that didn't point north but instead spun slowly, seeming to search for something, and a glass vial filled with what looked like clear water but swirled with tiny lights. Take these. The compass will guide you toward what you need to find, even if you don't know what that is yet. The vial contains dream water from the deepest part of the forest. If you're in mortal danger, if the hunt catches you, if you're about to be consumed by a nightmare you can't escape break it, the water will buy you time. One use only, so choose wisely. Chris took the compass, feeling its weight in his palm. The needle spun, searching, and then stopped, pointing toward the door, toward the deep forest, toward whatever waited in the darkness beneath the trees. One more thing, Felix said. You'll be alone out there, mostly. Maudeline and I can't go with you. We're bound to the shallow places, the edges of the dream. But you may encounter helpers, fragments of your own psyche trying to aid you. Trust them, but not blindly. Even your own mind can lie to you in dreams. How encouraging, Samantha said dryly. Maudeline smiled. You have spirit, girl. That's good. You'll need it.
How encouraging, Samantha said dryly. Maudeline smiled. You have spirit, girl. That's good. You'll need it. She opened the door, and cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of earth and decay and something else, something sweet and rotting, like fruit left too long in the sun. The forest is waiting. The journey begins now. And remember, everything you see, everything you encounter, is part of you. Part of your dream. Face it bravely, and you might just wake up in time. Chris and Samantha stood at the threshold, looking out into the vast darkness of the forest. The trees seemed to lean toward them, branches reaching like arms. Somewhere in the distance, the gourd prophet's voice echoed. Confess your sins to the hollow places. And somewhere closer, much closer, came the sound of horns. The hunt, beginning its nightly ride. Chris took his sister's hand. Her fingers were cold and trembling, but her grip was firm. Together, he said, just as he had before they drank the tea. Together, she agreed. They stepped out of the cottage and into the deep forest, into the heart of their own dying dream. Following a compass that pointed toward mysteries they couldn't name, and carrying a vial of water that might save them, or might do nothing at all. Behind them, Maudeline closed the door softly. Good luck, children, she whispered to the night. You're going to need it. And the forest swallowed them whole. 2 small figures disappearing between ancient trees, walking deeper and deeper into the darkness where answers waited alongside horrors, where truth lived next door to madness, where they would either find the key to waking or lose themselves forever in the endless maze of their own subconscious. The compass spun in Chris's hand. The vial glowed faintly in Samantha's pocket, and the hunt's horns grew louder, closer, more insistent. The real journey was just beginning. Chapter 6. The reversed visions and the treeman's warning, they walked for what felt like hours. Though time had become unreliable, the forest seemed to breathe around them, expanding and contracting, making distance meaningless. Sometimes they'd pass the same twisted oak 3 times in 10 minutes. Other times they'd walk for ages and look back to find Maudeline's cottage still visible through the trees, no farther away than when they'd started. "This is maddening," Samantha said, stumbling over a route that definitely hadn't been there a moment ago. "We're not getting anywhere." Chris consulted the compass. The needle spun lazily, seeming uncertain, then stopped, pointing slightly to their left. "It keeps changing direction. Whatever it's leading us to isn't staying in one place." "Wonderful. We're following a compass to find something that moves. In a forest that doesn't obey geography, while being hunted by something we can't see." Samantha laughed, but it had a brittle edge. "At least we can't say our live day alive was boring." "Don't talk like that." "Why not?" "We're dying, Chris. Really dying. Every minute we spend here is a minute our bodies are." She stopped, swallowing hard. "I don't want to think about it." They continued in silence, the compass leading them through increasingly strange terrain. The trees grew closer together, their branches weaving overhead into a canopy so thick that no light penetrated. Yet somehow they could still see a sourceless illumination that seemed to come from the air itself, rendering everything in shades of grey and deep green. The forest floor became softer, almost, and Chris realized with distaste that they were walking on moss that felt disturbingly like flesh. Each step produced a faint squelching sound that made his skin crawl. "There," Samantha said, pointing ahead. Through the trees, a structure emerged, not a building, exactly, but something constructed, a clearing where the trees formed a perfect circle. And in the center of that circle stood what looked like the ruins of a small chapel. The walls were mostly gone, just fragments of stone covered in vines and lichen, but the floor remained. Worn flagstones arranged in an intricate pattern, and in the center of the pattern sat an object that made no sense. A chamber pot, plain white porcelain, chipped and stained, completely out of place among the ancient stones. What in God's name? Chris approached cautiously, the compass needle spinning wildly in his hand before pointing directly at the chamber pot. "This is what we've been following." "A toilet vessel?" Samantha moved closer, studying the flagstones. "Look at the pattern. It's not random. It's a puzzle. See? Each stone has a symbol carved into it." She was right. Chris knelt down, brushing away moss and dirt to reveal the carvings. They were crude, but deliberate. A sun, a moon, stars, a tree, a bird, a fish, a hand, an eye. Dozens of them, arranged in concentric circles around the chamber pot. "This feels like a test," Samantha said quietly. "The kind of puzzle we're supposed to solve to move forward." Chris stood and walked the perimeter of the circle. At 4 points, evenly spaced, were objects embedded in the stone. A slop pail filled with dark, brackish water, a set of rosary beads draped over a stone outcropping, a small mirror propped against a tree root, and a book, its pages yellowed and water-damaged, lying open to a page covered in illegible script. 4 objects, 4 cardinal directions, Chris said. And all these symbols on the stones. We're supposed to... What? Arrange something. Walk a specific path. Samantha picked up the rosary beads carefully. as though they might bite. Mother used to have beads like this. She'd pray on them every night before bed, counting prayers like counting sheep. She frowned. Wait. Counting. Chris, what if we're supposed to count something? The symbols? They spent the next 20 minutes examining the stones, trying to find a pattern. Chris counted the suns, 7, the moons, 5, the stars, 12. Samantha counted the trees, 9, the birds, 6, the fish, 3. But no matter how they arranged the numbers, nothing happened. This is impossible, Chris said, frustration mounting. We're missing something obvious. Or we're thinking about it wrong. Samantha sat down on one of the larger stones, accidentally placing her hand on a carving of an eye. The moment she touched it, the stone beneath her shifted slightly, sinking a fraction of an inch into the ground. They both froze. Don't move, Chris whispered. I wasn't planning to, Samantha whispered back. Chris knelt down beside her, examining the stone. Press it again. Deliberately this time. Samantha lifted her hand and pressed the eye symbol. The stone sank again, and somewhere in the clearing they heard a soft click. One of the stones near the chamber pot shifted, rising slightly above the others. It's not about counting, Chris said, excitement rising in his chest. It's about stepping. We have to walk on the stones in a specific order. Create a path from the edge to the center. But what order? Samantha stood carefully, testing her weight on different stones. There must be hundreds of them. Chris looked at the 4 objects again. The slop pail, the rosary beads, the mirror, the book. They're clues. The objects tell us the order. We just have to decode them. They experimented, pressing different stones, watching which ones caused clicks and which ones did nothing. Gradually, a pattern emerged. Stones with symbols related to religion, the sun, the eye, the hand in blessing responded when they held the rosary beads. Stones with symbols of reflection, the moon, the stars. The mirror-like pools responded when they held the mirror. Stones with symbols of nature responded when they touched the water from the slop pail. And stones with symbols of knowledge, the book, the quill. The scroll responded when they held the ancient book. It's a sequence, Samantha said. We have to carry each object in turn, stepping only on the stones it activates, creating a path from each cardinal point to the center. It took time, careful, painstaking time, but eventually they mapped out the path, starting from the north with the rosary beads, stepping on sunai, hand sunai, carrying them to the chamber pot and placing them inside. Then south with the mirror, west with the slop pail, east with the book. Each object was placed in the chamber pot, and with each addition, the clearing grew brighter, the sourceless light intensifying. When the last object, the book, was placed in the chamber pot, something fundamental shifted. The air shimmered. And the chamber pot began to glow with the same turquoise gold light they'd seen cracking through the ceiling of their flooded house. Then it split, not broke split, like a seed pod opening. And from inside, it rose 2 distinct lights. One silver white, one deep amber. The lights drifted upward, separating, moving toward Chris and Samantha like living things. What do we? Chris started, but the silver-white light touched him before he could finish. The world disappeared. Chris, he was floating again, but this was different from before. Last time, he'd risen up and out, looking down at himself. This time, he was being pulled inward and outward simultaneously, stretched across some impossible dimension that had no name in waking language. And then he was somewhere else entirely. A city. The same city Samantha had seen, he realized with a show Los Angeles in 2024. But he was experiencing it differently. Where Samantha had walked as a ghost among the people, Chris found himself inside them. His consciousness flickered from person to person like a radio tuning through stations, spending a few seconds in each mind before moving to the next. He was a woman rushing to work, worried about traffic, thinking about her daughter's soccer game. Feeling the ache in her lower back from sleeping wrong, he was a man buying coffee, trying not to think about the argument he'd had with his husband that morning. Wondering if 12 years together was enough, or if they'd finally hit the wall everyone said was inevitable. He was a teenager on a bus, earbuds in, listening to music Chris couldn't hear, but could feel. A rhythmic pulse that matched the anxiety in the kid's chest about a test he hadn't studied for, and a text he hadn't answered, and a future that felt both impossibly far away and terrifyingly close. The sensation was overwhelming. Each mind he touched brought its full weight of emotion, memory, sensation. He felt their joys and fears and mundane concerns, felt the texture of their daily lives, felt how they each carried their own private universes of meaning. But what struck him most was the electricity. It was everywhere. In the lights that illuminated the streets. In the devices people held, glowing screens that seemed to contain entire worlds. In the cars that moved without horses, powered by invisible forces. In the buildings that stretched toward the sky, their windows lit from within by clean, steady luminescence. The future he'd glimpsed as a child at that exhibition with his father had arrived. More than arrived, it had become so commonplace that people barely noticed it. They complained about their electric devices, grew frustrated when they didn't work, took for granted what would have seemed like pure magic to anyone from his time. And yet, Chris sensed they weren't happier. The electricity hadn't solved the fundamental problems of being human. People still worried, still hurt, still felt alone in crowds. The technology had simply changed the context of their suffering, not eliminated it. He felt a profound sadness at this realization, and with the sadness came a question. Was this what they were fighting to wake up to? A future that was brighter, but not necessarily better. Lives that were longer, but not necessarily richer. Then the perspective shifted, and he was no longer in individual minds, but somehow seeing the city from above, from everywhere, seeing it as a whole organism. Millions of lives intersecting and diverging, creating patterns of light and meaning that were beautiful and terrible simultaneously. And he understood something. This future existed because people chose to keep living. Despite suffering, despite uncertainty, despite the knowledge that electricity and progress couldn't fix everything, they chose to continue. They woke up each day and decided to try again. That was the key. Not hope for a perfect future, but commitment to an imperfect one. The choice to live even when living was hard. Chris felt tears on his cheeks that he didn't actually have, felt his incorporeal self shaking with the weight of this knowledge. And then he was being pulled back, away from the future, back through time. Samantha, the amber light touched her, and she gasped as reality inverted. She was floating above herself. She could see her body standing in the clearing far below, could see Chris beside her, both of them frozen in postures of surprise as the lights touched them. But unlike Chris's experience, where he'd met fragmented versions of himself, Samantha found she was entirely alone in this vast space between spaces. No, not alone. There was something here with her. A presence. vast and cold, and utterly indifferent to her existence. She tried to speak, to call out, but she had no voice. She tried to look around, to orient herself, but there was nothing to see, just endless grey emptiness in all directions, and the terrible sense of something watching her. Then understanding crashed into her like a physical blow. This was death. Not her death specifically, but death as a concept, as a force, as the inevitable endpoint of all living things. She was experiencing what it felt like to not be, to have her consciousness persist for just a moment after the body failed, to exist in that terrible in-between space where there was awareness but no life to support it. Her body was dying. Right now, back in Pennsylvania, her lungs were failing, her heart was slowing, and her mind was falling into this void. This was what awaited if she couldn't wake up. Not peaceful sleep, not gentle darkness, but this awful grey nothingness, this sense of being a thought with nowhere to think, a feeling with nothing to feel about. Terror overwhelmed her. She tried to scream, to flee, to do anything, but there was nothing to do and nowhere to go. She was trapped in this liminal space, this threshold between life and death, and the presence death itself perhaps, or her own fear given form pressed closer. And then, like a whisper in the void, she heard Chris's voice. Not his actual voice, but the memory of it, saying what he'd said before they drank the tea, together. The word became an anchor. She held on to it, used it to remember who she was. Samantha Henderson, 17 years old, stubborn and vain and determined, who wanted to see the future, who refused to die in a yellow house without living first. The void pushed back, trying to erase her, but she pushed harder. She thought of electricity, of the city she'd seen, of all the possibilities that awaited. She thought of her parents, her real parents, who loved her. She thought of Chris, who'd thrown her out a window to save her life and would probably never let her forget it. She thought of the future self she'd met, the woman who'd lived a long, if unsatisfying life. At least that woman had lived, had made choices, even wrong ones, had existed in the world rather than dissolving into grey nothing. Samantha made a choice then, there in the void. She would not let death take her. Not yet. Not today. She had too much to do, too many versions of herself to try on before she settled on one. The grey began to retreat. The presence pulled back, and Samantha felt herself being drawn down, 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 back toward her body. They both gasped simultaneously, consciousness slamming back into their physical forms with such force they stumbled and nearly fell. Chris grabbed Samantha's arm to steady her, and she grabbed his in turn, both of them breathing hard, eyes wide with the residue of what they'd experienced. "You saw it," Chris said. "The future, the city, the electricity. You saw it," Samantha replied. "The void, the grey, the death." They stared at each other. Somehow, impossibly, they traded visions. Chris had experienced what Samantha saw the first time, and Samantha had experienced what Chris saw. They'd walked in each other's revelations. "Why?" Samantha whispered. "Why did we switch?" "Because you needed to see what I saw," Chris said slowly, understanding dawning. "You needed to feel the future, to know what we're fighting for. And I needed to feel what you felt to understand what we're fighting against. We needed each other's perspective to fully understand what's at stake." The clearing around them had changed. The chamber pot and its contents were gone. The puzzle stones had rearranged themselves into a new pattern path, leading out of the clearing toward a part of the forest they hadn't explored yet. The puzzle wasn't just about getting the objects to the center, Samantha said. It was about forcing us to work together, to solve something neither of us could solve alone, and to prepare us for what comes next, Chris added, looking at the path. We've both seen both sides now, death and life, the future and the void. We understand completely what we're trying to wake up to and what happens if we fail. They followed the path, which led them through increasingly dense forest. The trees here were older, their trunks so wide it would take a dozen men holding hands to circle them. The bark was black as coal and rough, and where Chris brushed against it, he felt a strange warmth, as though the trees were alive in a way normal trees weren't. The hunt's horns sounded again, closer now, but still distant enough that they didn't need to run. Yet. Do you think the rosary beads meant something? Samantha asked as they walked. I keep thinking about Mother praying on hers, the way she'd count, her lips moving silently. It always seemed like she was talking to someone who wasn't there. Maybe she was, Chris said. Or maybe prayer is just another way of talking to yourself, trying to make sense of things. No different than what we're doing here, really walking through our own minds, looking for answers. That's a depressing thought. Is it? I don't know anymore. After seeing all those people in the future, all those individual minds living their individual lives, all that consciousness swimming around in the world, maybe prayer is just acknowledging that we're not alone. Even if God doesn't answer, at least we're speaking into the void instead of sitting in silence. When did you become a philosopher? When we got poisoned and trapped in a death dream, apparently. Samantha laughed a real laugh this time, not hysteria, but genuine amusement. Fair enough. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the path leading them onward. The compass had stopped spinning entirely now, its needle pointing steadfastly forward, suggesting they were on the right track. Then the path opened into another clearing, and they stopped short. A man stood in the center of the clearing. Or what had been a man. Or what was becoming something else entirely. His lower half had transformed completely into woodknot, like he was wearing wooden legs, but as though his flesh had literally become bark and root. His legs had split and spread, burrowing into the earth, anchoring him in place. His torso was caught mid-transformation, patches of bark spreading across his skin like a disease or a metamorphosis. His arms were still mostly human, but his fingers had elongated into twigs, sprouting small leaves.
His face remained intact, human eyes staring out from skin that was slowly turning rough and brown. He looked at them with an expression of profound sadness. "You shouldn't have come this way," he said. His voice was like wind through branches, still recognizably human, but taking on the characteristics of the forest itself. "The path you're on leads to the heart, to the center of the dream, and the center is where the worst things live." "Who are you?" Chris asked, fighting the urge to back away. "I was Edmund Carthage," the mantri said. "A lawyer from Boston. I was poisoned too, 15 years ago. Mercury in my tea, a business rival's doing. I fell into the deep dreaming like you did, and I wandered these woods looking for the way out, and He paused, and a branch sprouted from his shoulder, pushing through his shirt. "I stopped. I got tired. I sat down to rest, just for a moment, and the forest took me, started turning me into part of itself. I've been here ever since, rooted in place, watching other dreamers pass by, watching them search for the exit I never found." Samantha's hand found Chris's. "Did your body die? In the waking world?" "I don't know," Edmund said. "I lost touch with it years ago. Or what feels like years' time doesn't work right. Here, I might have died the day I arrived, Or I might still be lying in a hospital bed, my mind trapped here while my body withers away. There's no way to know. More branches sprouted, this time from his back, reaching toward the canopy above. But I can tell you this, the deeper you go, the harder it is to remember what's real. The dream becomes more solid, more convincing. You start to accept it. And once you accept it, you're here forever. We won't forget, Chris said, though his voice trembled. We can't. Too much depends on it. They all say that, Edmund replied. Every dreamer who passes through says they won't forget, they won't give up, they'll find the way out. And some do. I've seen them disappear, pulled back to the waking world, saved at the last moment. But most don't. Most wander deeper and deeper until they become part of the forest themselves. Trees, animals, voices in the wind. All dreamers who forgot they were dreaming. Chris felt cold spreading through his chest. The reindeer, the prophet, even Mordeline, all dreamers once, Edmund confirmed. All people who fell into the deep places and never found their way back. Mordeline is old, centuries old, maybe older. She barely remembers being human. But she chose to help rather than harm, so she became the witch in the woods, the dangerous helper. Others chose differently, or simply got lost, and became monsters. Then how do we avoid that? Samantha asked. How do we make sure we wake up instead of becoming this? She gestured at him, at his half-tree form. You keep moving, Edmund said simply. Never stop, never rest, never accept the dream as reality. And when you reach the center, when you find whatever your subconscious has placed there as the key to waking you, seize it immediately. Don't hesitate. Don't question it. Just take it and force yourself awake with every ounce of will you possess. The branches growing from him began to bloom small white flowers that looked like apple blossoms, beautiful and completely wrong. I should warn you, he continued, his voice growing fainter, more like rustling leaves. There's something at the center, something neither alive nor dead, something made of all the fear and pain and betrayal you've experienced, given form and hunger. It's waiting for you. It knows you're coming, and it will do everything in its power to keep you here forever. What is it? Chris asked. But Edmund's face was becoming less human by the second, his eyes clouding over, his mouth stiffening into a knothole. He managed to say, his words slurring as his tongue became wood. Your parents! And then he was gone, fully transformed. Just another tree in the forest, indistinguishable from the others except for the small white blossoms that covered his branches like snow. Chris and Samantha stood in silence, staring at the tree that had been Edmund Carthage, lawyer from Boston, dreamer who'd stopped moving and paid the ultimate price. Our parents, Samantha whispered. At the center. What does that mean? Chris thought back to the thing in their flooded house, the creature with mother's face and father's face and too many limbs. The monster from the house. It's waiting for us. At the heart of the dream, the final challenge. But it's not really them, Samantha said, though she sounded like she was trying to convince herself. It's just our fear, our trauma about being betrayed. It can't actually hurt us. Can't it? Chris looked at the tree that had been Edmund. Everything here can hurt us, Sam. Maybe not physically, but in ways that matter just as much. That thing at the center, it's made of our worst fears about our parents. That they didn't protect us. That they somehow enabled our poisoning. That family isn't safe. If we can't face that, can't work through it, we end up like him, Samantha finished. Rooted in place, part of the forest forever. The compass in Chris's hand began to vibrate, the needle spinning wildly. Whatever they were meant to find, they were getting close. The center of the dream was near. We should go back, Samantha said suddenly. Regroup, talk to Mordeline again. Make a better plan. We can't, Chris said, though every part of him agreed with her. We don't have time. Our bodies are dying. Every moment we waste is... He stopped, listening. The horns had gone silent. That was somehow worse than hearing them. When they could hear the hunt, they knew where it was, could gauge the distance. But silence meant it could be anywhere. Could be watching them right now from between the trees. We have to keep moving, Chris said. Edmund was right about that. We can't stop. We can't rest. We push forward until we reach the center, face whatever's there, and force ourselves awake. And if we can't? Samantha's voice was very small. If it's too strong? If we're not strong enough? Chris looked at his sister, her torn dress, her wild hair, her face smudged with dirt and fear, but set with determination. He thought about throwing her out the window, about her laughing in the face of death, about her wanting to see the future badly enough to fight for it. Then we use the vial, he said. The dream water Mordeline gave us. We buy ourselves time. And we try again. And we keep trying until we succeed, or until our bodies give up entirely, because that's all we can do. Samantha nodded slowly. Then, surprising him, she reached up and hugged him quick and fierce, her arms tight around his neck. "I'm glad I'm not doing this alone," she whispered. "I'm glad you're here." "Me too," Chris said, hugging her back. "Even if we both die, at least we're dying together." That's morbid. Everything about this is morbid. They pulled apart, and Samantha wiped her eyes quickly. "All right then, let's go face our demon parents. What's the worst that could happen? We could be trapped in a nightmare forest forever, slowly transforming into trees while our bodies rot in a yellow house in Pennsylvania. Besides that, I honestly can't think of anything worse. Then let's get it over with." They followed the compass deeper into the forest, where the trees grew so close together they had to walk single file, where the air grew thick and hard to breathe, where the sourceless light dimmed until they were walking in near darkness. And somewhere ahead, in a clearing they couldn't yet see, at the center of concentric rings of forest and dream and dying consciousness, something with too many faces smiled and waited for the Henderson children to arrive. The hunt would not be far behind. Chapter 7. The center, the truth, and the awakening. The trees parted like a curtain, and they emerged into the final clearing. It was larger than Chris expected, a perfect circle, perhaps 100 feet across, ringed by those ancient black trees whose trunks seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The ground was carpeted with roses, thousands of them, all varieties and colors, blooming impossibly in the dim forest light. Their scent was overwhelming, sweet and cloying, and underneath it all, the faint smell of rot, as though the flowers were both fresh and decaying simultaneously. In the center of the clearing stood their house, not the wreckage they'd left behind, not the tilted, half-drowned nightmare they'd escaped. This was their house as it should be, the yellow two-story home in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, pristine and solid and completely wrong in its rightness. Lamplight glowed in the windows. Smoke curled from the chimney. Through the parlor window, Chris could see movement shadows that might have been people. "No," Samantha breathed. "No, this isn't right." "It's the center," Chris said, his voice hollow. "The heart of the dream. Our subconscious showing us what we want most: home, safety, normalcy. But it's a trap. It has to be." The front door opened. Mother stood in the doorway, exactly as they remembered her. Her hair was pinned up neatly, her apron clean, her face arranged in the warm, slightly worried expression she always wore when her children were late for dinner. Behind her, Father appeared, newspaper tucked under his arm, pipe in hand. "Children," Mother called, her voice achingly familiar. "Where have you been?" "Dinner's getting cold. We've made lentil soup, your favorite, Christopher. And Samantha, Mrs. Pennyweather brought over the most lovely roses from her garden. Come inside before you catch your death." Every instinct in Chris's body screamed at him to run toward them, to collapse into his mother's arms, to go inside where it was warm and safe and real. He took a step forward before Samantha grabbed his arm. "That's not them," she hissed. "That's what Edmund warned us about, the thing at the center. It's wearing their faces." Chris shook his head, trying to clear it. She was right. Of course she was right. But the pull was so strong. The house looked so real. His mother's voice was so perfectly, heartbreakingly accurate. "We know what you are," Chris called out, his voice shaking. "You're not our parents. You're our fear, our trauma. The betrayal we felt when we realized we'd been poisoned in our own home." Mother's face didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, something cold and vast. "Is that what you think?" she asked. "That we're not real?" "Oh, Christopher, we're more real than you are. We're what remains when everything else is stripped away, the truth you don't want to face." And what truth is that? Samantha demanded. Father stepped forward, and as he did, the house behind him wavered, becoming less solid. That you've been asleep far longer than you think, that your bodies are gone, that you died in those beds in Pennsylvania weeks ago, and that he gestured around them. At the forest, the roses, the impossible clearing, this is all that's left. Your consciousness, unable to let go, wandering in circles, telling itself stories about waking up. You're lying, Chris said, but his voice was weak. Am I? Father smiled, and it was his real smile, the one he wore when he was about to make a point in one of their philosophical discussions. Think about it, son. How long have you been walking? How many times have you solved a puzzle only to find another one? How many warnings have you received? How many chances to turn back? This isn't a dream you can wake from. This is death, and you're simply refusing to accept it. The roses around them began to wilt, their petals browning and falling like snow. Samantha's hand was shaking in Chris's, her grip painfully tight. Even if that's true, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, even if we're dead, I'd rather keep trying than give up. I'd rather walk forever than stop here with you. Mother's expression finally changed, twisting into something that was definitely not human. Foolish girl. You think you have a choice? You think will matters here? We are the center. We are the truth. And you will stay with us forever, because there is nowhere else to go. The house began to melt, its yellow walls running like paint, revealing what lay beneath. The thing from the flooded parlor, but larger now, more terrible. It had too many limbs, too many faces, not just their parents but Betty, the Pennyweathers, Thomas with his cruel smile, and faces Chris didn't recognize, victims from other dreams perhaps, other families torn apart by poison and betrayal. We are everyone who ever hurt you, the thing said with 100 voices. Everyone who pretended to love you while planning your destruction. Everyone who smiled to your face and plotted behind your back. We are the truth of human nature, children. And you belong to us. It reached for them with arms that were also branches, also water, also nothing. Chris pulled out the vial of dream water, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. Sam, when I break this run and don't look back. I'm not leaving you. You have to. One of us needs to wake up. One of us needs to tell them what happened, needs to make sure the Pennyweathers don't get away with it. He pressed the compass into her hand. Take this. It'll guide you out. I'll hold this thing off as long as I can. Chris, no. But he'd already thrown the vial at the thing's feet. The glass shattered, and the dream water exploded outward in a wave of pure light. So bright Chris had to shield his eyes. The creature screamed, all of its mouth screaming at one sound recoiled, its form scattering and reforming, unable to hold shape in the presence of the water. Go, Chris shouted, pushing Samantha away. She stumbled, then ran, disappearing between the black trees. Chris turned back to the creature, which was already recovering, the light fading, its many faces arranging themselves into expressions of rage. Brave, it hissed. Foolish, but brave. Do you really think that bought her anything? Do you think she can escape? There is no escape. There is only a voice cut through the clearing, sharp and commanding. Oh, do shut up. You're always so melodramatic. Maudeline stepped out from between the trees, and she wasn't alone. Felix was with her, and behind them came others, the reindeer, no longer silent but stamping their hooves and snorting with what looked like indignation. The gourd prophet, its carved face somehow expressing determination, and more dreamers in various states of transformation, some nearly trees, some nearly animals, but all still human enough to remember what it meant to fight. You can't be here, the creature said, its voices uncertain now. This is the center. This is my domain. Your domain is a fiction, Maudeline said coldly. You're nothing but a bad thought, a piece of trauma that got too big for its britches. And we've all had quite enough of you. She raised her hands, and the bottles around her neck began to glow sassafras root, willow bark, tears and dreams, and all the strange substances she'd collected. You are not the truth. You're a lie. The lie that says trauma defines us, that betrayal destroys us, that we can't heal from what hurts us. And I have been killing lies for centuries. She spoke a word, the same word she'd used to banish the creature from the house ruins, and this time Chris heard it clearly. It wasn't a word in any language he knew, but he understood its meaning. Enough. The creature shrieked and convulsed, its many faces contorting. But the poison, the betrayal, the death, was real, Felix said, stepping forward. But not final, not defining. These children were betrayed, yes. Poisoned, yes. But that's not the end of their story. That's not all they are. And you're just the part that wants to give up, to surrender, to let the trauma win. Well, you don't get to decide. They do. The half-transformed dreamers moved forward, surrounding the creature. Edmund, the tree's branches rustled, and somehow Chris heard his voice. We couldn't escape. We gave up, but they haven't. Don't let them end up like us. The reindeer lowered their antlers. The gourd prophet raised its arms and began to preach, but this time its words were coherent. For even in the deepest darkness, the smallest light endures. For even in the longest sleep, the dream of waking remains. For even in death, life persists in memory, in love, in the continuation of what was begun. The creature was shrinking, its many forms collapsing inward. This isn't fair, it whimpered. This isn't how it works. I'm the center. I'm the truth. You're afraid, Chris said suddenly, understanding flooding through him. You're not our fear of betrayal. You're the fear itself, afraid of being overcome, afraid of us healing, afraid of becoming irrelevant. The creature looked at him with all its faces, and in them he saw not malevolence but desperation. It didn't want to hurt them. It wanted to keep them because it didn't know how to exist otherwise. If they woke up, if they healed, what would happen to all this trauma, all this pain? Where would it go? You don't disappear, Chris said softly. Even when we wake up, even when we heal, you'll still be part of us. But you don't get to be the whole story. You're just a chapter. And it's time to turn the page. The creature made a sound like crying, like laughing, like the wind through empty rooms. And then it began to dissolve, not violently but gently, turning into rose petals that scattered in a breeze that came from nowhere. The clearing transformed. The black trees became normal oaks and maples. The roses remained but no longer smelled of rot, and in the center, where the house had been, there was now a door. Just a door, standing upright without walls, its frame made of honey-colored wood. That's your way out, Mordeline said, walking over to stand beside Chris. Through there, you wake up. But you need to hurry, your sister is running, but she doesn't know where she's going. The compass will guide her back here eventually, but time is running out. What about you? Chris asked. All of you, Edmund, the others. What happens to you when we leave? Mordeline smiled sadly. We stay. We're permanent residents now, too far gone to wake up. But we can help others find their way out. That's enough of a purpose for me. She touched his face gently, and her hand was surprisingly warm. Go, child. Wake up. Live the life we couldn't. And when you're old and dying, really dying, not this false death maybe, think of us sometimes. The dreams that helped you escape. Chris wanted to argue, wanted to insist they deserved to wake up too, but he knew it was pointless. Some things couldn't be fixed, couldn't be saved. Sometimes all you could do was honor the sacrifice and move forward. He ran through the forest, following the sound of Samantha's footsteps, calling her name. The compass in her pocket was pulling her in circles, confused now that the center was gone. He found her collapsed against a tree, sobbing with exhaustion and fear. Chris. She threw herself at him. I thought it got you, it's gone. Mordeline and the others destroyed it. But we have to go now. The door is open. We can wake up. They ran back to the clearing together, hand in hand, dodging trees that seemed to lean in to help rather than hinder. The door was still there, standing impossible and solid, with light seeping around its frame, real light, sunlight, the light of the waking world.
Wait, Samantha said, stopping. The emerald brooch, Mother's brooch, the one she forgot at the Hartwicks the morning, that's why they came back early. That's why they were there, to find us dying. Chris frowned. So your memory, the one you gave to Felix, father at the exhibition, teaching you about electricity, Thomas Edison's inventions, the light bulbs, the dynamos, that's what saved us in the end, isn't it? Understanding that, even in darkness, there's light, that the modern age, the turn of the century we were living in, it was all about illumination, about bringing light to dark places. I don't understand what you're saying. I'm saying the clues were there all along. Mother's brooch, an emerald green like growth, like life. Father's obsession with progress. Mozart playing on our piano. Samantha had been practicing the piano sonata No. 11, the one everyone played that year in 1900. Betty making lentil soup. The Pennyweathers bringing roses. Even the outhouses being replaced by indoor plumbing. Everything was about the old world giving way to the new, about transformation, about death and rebirth, and spontaneous human combustion, Chris added suddenly. Remember, Thomas Pennyweather was obsessed with it, kept talking about it at dinner, about people burning up from the inside with no external cause. That's what the poison was supposed to look like, as if we died from some mysterious internal cause, not murder. But we didn't burn, Samantha said. We flooded, our lungs filled with water because our bodies were fighting back, producing fluid to try to flush out the poison. We were trying to save ourselves even while we slept. They stood before the door, understanding crystallizing. Everything in the dream had been a clue, a symbol, their subconscious trying to guide them toward the truth. And now they knew it all, who poisoned them, why, how, and most importantly, that they could survive it. Together? Chris asked one more time. Together, Samantha agreed. They opened the door. Pennsylvania, 1900. The waking world. Chris's body convulsed in the bed, drawing a sharp breath that rattled in his fluid-filled lungs. Across the hall, Samantha did the same. Doctors rushed to their sides, calling out for implements, for medicines, for help from God himself. Their mother collapsed to her knees, rosary beads clutched in her hands, thanking every saint she could name. Their father stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and desperate hope. In the corner of Chris's room, Betty Wickham watched with tears streaming down her face. When the police came later, called by the doctor who recognized poison symptoms, she would confess everything, would tell them about Thomas Pennyweather's blackmail, about the vial, about the money she'd been promised and the secret she'd been protecting, would beg for forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve. The Pennyweathers would try to flee, would make it as far as the train station before being apprehended, would spend the rest of their lives in prison, their debts unpaid, their reputation destroyed, their futures as ruined as they'd tried to ruin the Hendersons. But Chris and Samantha knew none of this yet. They were still transitioning, still caught between sleeping and waking, their consciousnesses pulling away from the dream forest, away from Maudline and Felix and Edmund and all the trapped dreamers who'd helped them escape. And then something unexpected happened. Instead of waking in their beds in Pennsylvania, they found themselves standing on a street corner in a city that was and wasn't familiar. Los Angeles, 2024. But this time they weren't ghosts, weren't visions. They had bodies, solid, real bodies. They could feel the concrete under their feet, feel the sun warm on their skin, smell the overwhelming mixture of car exhaust and restaurant food and flowers from a nearby shop. What? Samantha started, but Chris was staring at his hands, his clothes. He wasn't wearing his 1900 outfit anymore. He wore what the people around them wore, casual clothes, strange fabrics, everything wrong and right simultaneously. He looked at Samantha and saw she was dressed the same way, her hair loose and modern, her face clean of the dirt from the forest. A woman approached them, not quite elderly but getting there, with grey-streaked hair and kind eyes. She wore layers of shawls and scarves despite the California warmth, and around her neck hung dozens of small bottles filled with coloured liquids. "Maudline?" Chris whispered. "Not quite," she said, smiling. "Though I am her in a way. Or she's me. It's complicated." She gestured for them to follow her to a small park nearby, away from the crowds. "You can call me Madeline Cho. I'm what becomes of Maudline when she gets born again in different times. The dream witch has many lives, many forms. And every century or so I help children like you escape the deep places." "But we're not dreaming anymore," Samantha said, touching her own face as if to confirm it was real. "We're awake. We woke up in 1900. I remember the doctors, mother crying, father calling for help. We survived." "You did?" Madeline confirmed. "And you lived full lives. Christopher, you became a doctor yourself, specializing in poisonings, developed treatments that saved countless lives. Samantha, you never did marry that Pennyweather boy. Instead you went to college, one of the first women admitted to Bryn Mawr, became a suffragette, lived to see women get the vote. You both died peacefully in your 80s, surrounded by children and grandchildren and the satisfaction of lives well lived. Chris felt dizzy. Then what is this? Why are we here? Because you wanted to see it, Madeline said simply. Both of you, in that dream, saw visions of the future. Samantha walked streets like these and wanted desperately to experience them for real. Christopher felt the electricity, the progress, the bright future you were promised at the turn of the century. And so, as you woke up, as your consciousnesses returned to your bodies, a part of you split off like an echo, a reflection. That part travelled forward through time, through all the years you would live and beyond, to arrive here, now. In the future you both glimpsed. An echo, Chris repeated. So we're not really here. We're not really alive in this time. You're as alive as any memory is, as any dream is. You're a moment of consciousness, experiencing what you wished you could experience before returning to the time and place you belong. Madeline gestured around them. This is my gift to you for surviving, for escaping, for not giving up. 1 hour in the future you fought so hard to believe in. 1 hour to see what you helped build. Samantha was crying, but she was smiling too. We can actually feel it, smell it, experience it. Yes, every sensation, every wonder, every strange and marvelous thing about this age. You have 1 hour. And then you go back to 1900, back to your healing bodies, back to the lives you're meant to live. But you'll remember this. This moment will stay with you always, a secret knowledge of where humanity is headed. And perhaps that knowledge will help you make different choices, better choices, as you live your lives. She handed them something, a small device, rectangular and glowing. A smartphone, she explained. Everyone has them here. They're computers, cameras, telephones, libraries, all in one object. You can ask it questions, and it will find answers from the vast store of human knowledge. You can take photographs of what you see. She showed them how to swipe, how to tap, how to access the wonders of the modern age. Chris and Samantha looked at each other, wonder and disbelief and joy mixing in their expressions. 1 hour, Chris said. 1 hour, Samantha agreed. They spent it exploring, walked through the city, marveling at the cars that moved without horses, the buildings that stretched toward the sky, the diversity of people, all colors, all styles, all living together in ways that would have been impossible in 1900. They bought food from a truck, tacos, something they'd never heard of, but that tasted like heaven. They took photographs of everything, capturing images instantly without chemicals or dark rooms. They watched people video chatting with loved ones on the other side of the world, faces appearing in real time on glowing screens. Chris asked the smartphone about medical advances and was overwhelmed by what he learned: diseases cured, lifespans doubled, procedures that seemed like miracles. Samantha looked up women's history and wept to learn about suffrage, about civil rights, about the slow, difficult progress toward equality. They went into a library not to read books, though there were books, but to use the computers, to access the internet, to swim in the vast ocean of human knowledge that was now available to anyone with a connection. They learned about world wars, about moon landings, about the fall of empires and the rise of new nations. They learned about Mozart's continued popularity, his music, still played, still loved centuries later. They learned about Edison's legacy, complicated but enduring. And they learned about their own descendants could trace their family tree forward through public records, seeing names and dates and photographs of people who would exist because they survived this poisoning, because they refused to give up in the dream forest. As the hour drew to a close, they found themselves back in the park with Madeline, both of them exhausted and exhilarated and fundamentally changed. Why? Samantha asked. Why give us this gift? What's the purpose? Madeline looked at them with ancient, kind eyes. Because hope matters. Because when you go back, when you live through the difficult years ahead, and there will be difficult years, you'll remember this. You'll remember that humanity persists, that progress, however slow, continues. That the future you're building with every choice, every action, every day you choose to keep living it leads somewhere. Somewhere beautiful and flawed and worth fighting for. She touched both their faces, her hands warm and real. And because you helped free so many trapped dreamers by defeating that creature at the center. Edmund and the others there, still trapped. Yes, but lighter now. Closer to waking perhaps, or at least closer to peace. You gave them hope too, by proving it could be done. That seemed worth rewarding. The world began to shimmer around them, becoming transparent. We're going back, Chris said. You are. To your time, your bodies, your lives. but you'll carry this with you this hour, this knowledge, this certainty that the struggle is worth it. Madeline smiled. Live well, children. Live bravely. And when you're old and it's time to dream your final dreams, perhaps you'll come back to my forest. I'll have tea waiting. The city faded. The sounds of traffic and voices grew distant. The smell of roses, real roses, not the rotting ones from the dream clearing, filled the air one last time. And then they were back. Pennsylvania, 1900. Chris opened his eyes, really opened them, for the first time since the poisoning. His throat was raw, his body weak, but he was alive. Truly, completely alive. Across the hall, Samantha was doing the same, gasping and crying and clutching their mother's hand with desperate strength. The doctors called it a miracle. Their parents called it divine intervention. Betty called it justice, that they survived despite her terrible betrayal. But Chris and Samantha knew better. They'd walked through hell or something like it, and they'd come out the other side. They'd seen both their death and their future, and they'd chosen the future. In his pocket, Chris found something that shouldn't exist. A small photograph printed on paper that wouldn't be invented for decades, showing him and Samantha standing on a Los Angeles street corner in 2024, grinning like fools, alive and real, and impossibly far from home. Evidence of their hour in the future. Proof it had really happened. Or perhaps just another dream. It didn't matter. What mattered was they'd survived. They'd woken up, and they had years ahead of them, years to live, to love, to build the world they'd glimpsed, one small choice at a time. Outside, the Pennsylvania summer sun shone through the window of their yellow house, bright and warm and full of promise. The turn of the century, the dawn of a new age, and two children who died and dreamed and lived again, ready to see what came next. The END epilogue. 3 days later, the yellow house in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, looked exactly as it always had: solid, cheerful, utterly ordinary. No sign that 3 days ago 2 of its inhabitants had nearly died within its walls. No indication that its kitchen had been the site of an attempted murder, or that its bedrooms had become portals to impossible dream worlds. Chris sat in the parlor, a blanket over his legs despite the summer warmth. He was still weak, his body recovering from the poison's assault, but the doctors said he would make a full recovery. Across from him, Samantha sat in Mother's chair, also wrapped in blankets, also pale but improving. Between them, on the small table, sat 2 cups of tea that neither had touched. "Do you think they know?" Samantha asked quietly. "Really know, I mean, what we experienced. How could they?" Chris replied. "We barely understand it ourselves." The parlor door opened, and their mother entered carrying a tray with sandwiches cut into careful triangles, crusts removed, exactly the way she always made them. She set the tray down gently, her hands trembling slightly. Margaret Henderson had aged a decade in 3 days. Her hair, always meticulously pinned, showed more grey than Chris remembered. Her face, usually animated and cheerful, was drawn and haunted. She'd barely left their bedside since they'd woken, as though afraid they might slip away again if she wasn't watching. "You should eat," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "The doctor said you need to rebuild your strength." "Mother," Chris said gently, "sit with us. Please." She hesitated, then sank into the chair beside Samantha, her composure finally cracking. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she covered her face with her hands. "I almost lost you both. Both of you. If we hadn't come home early, if I hadn't forgotten that damned brooch. But you did come home," Samantha said, reaching for her mother's hand. "You found us in time. Betty poisoned you. In my kitchen, under my roof. A girl I trusted, a girl I brought into our home." Margaret's voice broke. "How did I not see it? How did I not know?" The front door opened and closed, and Leonard Henderson's voice called out, "Margaret, children, I have news." He entered the parlor, still in his coat, his face grim but with an undercurrent of satisfaction. "The Pennyweathers have confessed. Thomas tried to claim it was all Betty's idea, that he knew nothing about it, but she told the police everything. About the blackmail, about their debts, about the plan to take control of our estate. They'll hang for this. All 3 of them." Chris felt something twist in his chest. Betty would hang. The young woman who'd served them breakfast every morning, who'd been terrified and coerced and trapped by the Pennyweathers' schemes. She'd tried to kill them, yes, but she'd also been a victim in her own way. What was he blackmailing her with? Samantha asked. Leonard sat down heavily. "Her brother. He's been in prison for theft, a crime he didn't commit apparently." Thomas Pennyweather knew the truth, knew who really did it, but threatened to ensure her brother hanged unless Betty cooperated. She thought she was saving her brother's life by— He couldn't finish the sentence. By trying to take ours, Chris finished quietly. The parlour fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock, the same clock that had been submerged in their dream, its face staring up through impossible water. "I keep having the strangest dreams," Margaret said suddenly. "About you too, about you walking through dark forests, facing terrible things, about helping you somehow, even though I was helpless here, watching you die. Is that mad? The doctor says it's just stress, but it feels so real." Chris and Samantha exchanged glances. In the dream, at the very end, when Magdalene and the others had appeared to fight the creature, had their mother been there too? Had her prayers, her love, her desperate hope somehow manifested in the deep dreaming? Was that part of how they'd survived? "It's not mad," Samantha said softly. I think maybe we were all connected somehow. Through the poison, through the fear, through love. I think maybe you were there with us, Mother, in the ways that matter." Margaret looked at her daughter with red-rimmed eyes. "I prayed," she whispered. "Every moment you were unconscious, I prayed. I told God he couldn't have you, not yet, not like this. I bargained and begged and promised anything if he'd just bring you back." She laughed weakly. "Your father says I've worn out my rosary beads. I held them so tightly they broke. I had to get new ones." "Prayer helped," Chris said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I know that sounds like superstition, but I know it did. We felt it. We felt you fighting for us." Leonard cleared his throat gruffly. "The police want to speak with you both when you're stronger. About the morning of the poisoning, about the Pennyweathers' visit the night before. Anything you remember that might help the case." "There's something else," Chris said. "Something we need to tell you, both of you." Over the next hour, Chris and Samantha told their parents everything. About the flooding house, the dream forest, Magdalene and Felix, the puzzles and the hunt, the creature at the center with their parents' faces. They didn't tell them about Los Angeles, about 2024. That seemed too impossible, too sacred to share. But they told them enough. Their parents listened in stunned silence. When Chris and Samantha finished, Margaret and Leonard looked at each other, some wordless communication passing between them. "You think we're mad," Samantha said. "No," Leonard said slowly. "No, I don't. I've read about such things, people who nearly die, who report experiences that can't be explained by science. Visions, journeys, encounters with impossible things. The medical journals dismiss it, but I've always wondered." He looked at his children with new respect, almost awe. "You traveled somewhere real. Even if it only exists in the space between living and dying, and you found your way back. That takes extraordinary courage. Or extraordinary stubbornness," Margaret added, but she was almost smiling. "You're Hendersons, after all. We don't give up easily." Chris pulled out the photograph, the one from 2024, showing him and Samantha on a Los Angeles street corner. He'd hidden it under his mattress, unsure if he should show anyone. Now he handed it to his father. Leonard studied it for a long moment, his brow furrowed. This can't be. It's the future," Chris said simply. "Over 100 years from now, we were given 1 hour there as a gift, as proof that the world continues, that life goes on, that everything we're building now leads somewhere beautiful." "The clothing," Margaret whispered, looking at the photograph over her husband's shoulder. "The buildings in the background. That style of photography doesn't exist yet. Christopher, how is this possible?"
"I don't know," Chris admitted. "But I think the point isn't to understand it. The point is to believe it, to trust that the choices we make now matter. That's surviving. Living, trying it all leads somewhere." Leonard handed the photograph back carefully, as though it might dissolve in his hands. "Then we live," he said firmly. "We live well and fully, and we don't let the Pennyweathers' evil define us. We honour the gift you've been given, the gift of life, of knowledge, of hope. And we're more careful about who we trust," Margaret added, a note of steel in her voice. "No more maids recommended by business associates. No more casual dinner invitations to people we barely know. No more assuming the best of everyone. But not assuming the worst either," Samantha said. "Betty was coerced. The Pennyweathers are the real villains. If we become suspicious and closed off, they win in a different way." "Wise words," Leonard said, pride evident in his voice.
Perhaps your time at Bryn Mawr isn't so far-fetched after all, daughter. Samantha's eyes widened. You'd let me go to college? After what you've survived, after what you've proven yourselves capable of? Margaret shook her head in wonder. I think preventing you from pursuing your education would be the greater crime. Times are changing. Your father, and I see that now. And perhaps, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Perhaps it's time we changed with them. They sat together as the afternoon light slanted through the parlour windows, a family reunited, scarred but whole. They didn't speak of the fear, of the hours of uncertainty, of how close they'd come to death. Instead, they spoke of the future of Chris's plans to study medicine, of Samantha's desire to attend college, of the new century spreading out before them like an unwritten book. Later that evening, after their parents had retired, Chris and Samantha sat together on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Do you think we'll ever tell anyone else? Samantha asked. About what really happened? Who would believe us? Fair point. She was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about Edmund, about all those trapped dreamers. They helped us escape, but they're still there. Still wandering in the forest, still slowly turning into trees and animals and voices in the wind. I know. Chris felt the weight of it, the guilt of surviving when others couldn't. But Mordeline said we gave them hope, that by proving it could be done, we made their existence lighter. I have to believe that matters, and we have to live for them, Samantha said. Live the lives they couldn't, make the most of this gift. No pressure, Chris said dryly, but he smiled as he said it. Samantha laughed a real laugh, free and bright and full of life. None at all. We just have to become a doctor and a suffragette, help build a better future, possibly change the world, and oh yes, avoid being murdered again. Simple. When you put it that way. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, Betty Wickham sat in a jail cell, awaiting trial. The Pennyweathers did the same. Their empire of debt and deception finally collapsed. The police worked to exonerate Betty's brother, to right at least one wrong in this tangle of injustice. But here, on the porch of the Yellow House, two children who'd walked through death and dreamed of the future sat together, alive and grateful and ready to begin again. Tomorrow Chris would start his recovery exercises, begin studying the medical texts his father brought home. Tomorrow Samantha would write to Bryn Mawr inquiring about admission requirements. Tomorrow they would take the first steps toward the lives they'd glimpsed in fragments and visions. But tonight they simply sat together, brother and sister, survivors, holders of impossible knowledge and inexplicable hope. In Chris's pocket, the photograph from 2024 remained safely hidden, proof of their journey or madness or both. It didn't matter which. What mattered was they'd seen the future and chosen to build toward it. The fireflies danced. The summer night breathed around them. And the Henderson children, who'd died and dreamed and lived again, smiled at the stars and wondered what other impossibilities awaited them in the years to come. End